FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301, A Factory Within a Factory. Crisis. At 3:30 in the morning, the streets of Los Angeles were still brightly lit, and the rhythmic music continued to sound out from bars and other entertainment venues. Girls dressed in cool clothes came in and out. Some came here to have fun, and some were fun in themselves. Some young people squatting on the roadside were laughing and discussing which girl was more in line with their aesthetics. The next second, two teams of dark SWAT team members suddenly appeared in front of them. FBI. Unrelated personnel, squat down with your hands on your head. Don't move. A SWAT team member pulled the trigger and killed a guy who wanted to shoot and attack them, and then quickly rushed into the bar. The SWAT team members behind him quickly followed, and Mona and several agents began to loudly maintain order behind them. On the other side, Lassie also led the SWAT team members and rushed into the apartment or villa where several high-level leaders of the William Mars gang lived. Her job was relatively simple: capturing the gang leader alive and killing the remaining rebels. At the same time, Luo An followed the SWAT team members and rushed to the target factory. Plastic bomb. Ready. Countdown 3 seconds. Detonate. The outer door of the abandoned factory was tightly closed. It was a very thick iron door. The SWAT agent did not hesitate and immediately attached a plastic bomb according to past experience. Boom. The order to detonate was given, and the SWAT team member holding the controller immediately pressed the button. The dazzling fire and deafening explosion suddenly exploded, and the warehouse iron door flew out in an instant. The moment the iron door flew out, the SWAT team members holding explosion-proof shields immediately took the lead and rushed into the warehouse. The rest of the team members hurriedly followed, and while quickly searching the warehouse, they shouted, "FBI! Raise your hands above your head. Everyone get out of the warehouse. Get out. Let us see your hands." Bang bang bang. When the SWAT team members broke in, there were several armed security guards who were responsible for guarding the place. Several of them immediately pulled the trigger at them without hesitation, but were soon shot in the head by the SWAT team members. Walking behind the SWAT team members, Roan, who had turned on the emotional perception in his mind, suddenly felt a cold malice coming from behind the shelf not far away, so he turned around and turned the gun and pulled the trigger there. Bang, bang, bang. According to the ability of emotional perception, he fired 3 shots in a row. The next second, a middle-aged white man with 2 holes in his chest and 1 hole in his head fell to the ground behind the shelf. The middle-aged white man's eyes were wide open, and he didn't close them even when he died. He didn't understand until his death how he was discovered. Seeing Roan's sudden shooting, Potent Burn's heart moved slightly, but before he could react, the dead body of the middle-aged white man appeared in front of him. Seeing this scene, Potent Burn's pupils shrank, and he looked at Roan in doubt and asked, "How did you find out?" Roan laughed and continued to walk forward slowly. Intuition. Potent Burn raised his eyebrows, didn't say much, and immediately raised his feet to catch up with Roan. With the 2 SWAT teams leading the way, the enemies in the warehouse were quickly eliminated, and a lot of raw materials for contraband were also found inside the warehouse. In a room deep in the warehouse, there was a basement hidden. After the SWAT team members cleared the enemies in the basement, Roan and Potent Burn walked into the basement and found that there was actually a room isolated in the basement. What shocked Roan and Potent Burn the most was that there were more than a dozen tables in the isolation room, and on the tables there were more than a dozen high-top pots baked by the fire. These pots were trembling and rumbling because of the flames and high temperatures. Obviously, this was a shoddy factory with completely failed safety indicators. Seeing this scene, Roan and Potent Burn's faces changed suddenly. "Fouquet. Back off. Back off this room immediately." Potent Burn shouted loudly, ordering the SWAT team members to leave here quickly. The fire under the pot was still on. If an explosion occurred, who knows if there would be any horrible chain reactions afterwards. Roan and Potent Burn quickly retreated to the exit of the basement and shouted, "Let the hazardous materials team come here quickly." As soon as the voice fell, a figure in SWAT uniform suddenly rushed forward instead of retreating, and rushed towards the isolation room at a high speed. Son of eating. Potent Burn saw this scene and immediately cursed. Roan also frowned, and quickly chased after him to stop him. What are you doing? It's too late for the hazardous materials team. We must turn off the fire now. Once the equipment inside explodes, the factory will definitely collapse, and the drug will spread everywhere. None of us will survive. The expression on the face of the SWAT team member was very urgent. Without talking nonsense with Roan, he picked up a gas mask from the ground and ran into the room. Seeing this, Roan's face was solemn, and he turned back and shouted, "Everyone, leave the basement immediately." Then he picked up another gas mask from the ground, opened the door of the isolation room, and rushed in. #@ Potent Burn saw Roan also run into the isolation room, and immediately cursed a lot of local slang, but this was not the time to hesitate, and immediately shouted to the SWAT team members to leave the basement. In the isolation room, Roan and the SWAT team member covered their noses with gas masks, one on the left and one on the right, and quickly closed a dozen high-top pots that were baked by flames, and trembling and rumbling. Roan's speed was very fast, and soon he closed all the 8 valves on the left that ignited the flame. Turning around, he found that the SWAT team member was sweating and struggling with one of the pots. He quickly ran to the other side and closed the flame valves under the 2 pots in the back. Roan then moved to the side of the SWAT team member and asked, "What's going on? This valve is stuck." The SWAT team member was sweating anxiously. "I can't turn it. Leave it to me." Roan immediately squeezed the SWAT team member aside and pinched the valve switch and twisted it hard. "It can't be turned." Luo An was stunned. He couldn't turn the valve even with all his strength. He lowered his head to check and then cursed, "Fuke. This valve is broken. It can't be closed." The high top pots and pans above his head rumbled and trembled more violently. Luo An immediately turned around and asked, "Can we just push this pot down?" The SWAT team members shook their heads again and again. "No, it will definitely explode immediately." Luo An didn't know much about the manufacturing of unique products. At this time, it was most appropriate to choose to trust the other party. Without hesitation, he proposed a second plan again. "Hurry up and find the main valve." "Okay." The SWAT team member's eyes lit up when he heard Luo An's words, and he quickly looked for the main valve along the pipeline structure. Luo An followed his instructions and quickly found the main valve and then turned it hard to the closing command position. Seeing the flames under the pots and pans slowly disappear, the SWAT team members breathed a sigh of relief. "Hurry up and leave here. Now is not the time to sigh. God knows whether those pots and pans will continue to explode." Luo An immediately pulled the SWAT team members out of the isolation room and walked towards the exit of the basement. On the other side, outside the factory, a team of SWAT members were escorting the people they arrested into the car. Team leader Potent Burn crossed his arms over his chest, staring at the factory with a serious expression. No one came out of the factory. Potent Burn pondered for a while, looked at the SWAT captain next to him who was also very nervous, and asked, "What is the name of the SWAT member who broke into the isolation room just now?" Chapter 302 Operation Successfully Harvested. Michelle Hugo. Outside the abandoned factory, the red and blue lights on the top of the troop carrier flashed on everyone's faces. Hunter Anderson. Hearing Potent Burn's question, the SWAT captain beside him answered, "He used to be from the Weapons of Mass Destruction Bureau." The Weapons of Mass Destruction Bureau is one of the departments of the Department of Homeland Security. Its main work content is to investigate, collect, and deal with weapons of mass destruction, including chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear weapons and explosive weapons. No wonder he knows the dangers of the unique products in the unique factory and how to deal with them. Potent Burn suddenly realized that at this moment, 2 people in the dark factory supported each other and walked out together. One of them was handsome and smiling, and the other wore a SWAT standard helmet with a grin. Seeing Roan and Hunter, Potent Burn and the SWAT captain all breathed a sigh of relief, and the rest of the team members cheered excitedly. "Great job. Great. Thank God." Roan waved to everyone and looked at Hunter, whose name he had just asked. "Remember to call me when you have time, and we'll go out for a drink together." "Okay, sure." Hunter grinned. Roan patted his shoulder without saying anything more and continued to direct the scene. The first task was to let the hazardous materials team deal with the semi-finished products in the basement. The operation was very successful. Lassie and Mona led the SWAT team to capture all the leaders of the William Mars gang. The main target, Ryan, and his mother were also taken back to the special investigation team. Roan's side was also smooth. After the hazardous materials team entered the basement, they all took a breath of cool air and then gave Roan and Henry a thumbs up. If they hadn't closed the valve in time, the captain of the hazardous materials team said that within 2 minutes, the whole street would be blown up. And there was a lot of powdered fentanyl in the basement. Once it exploded, the powder would definitely spread, and then no one near the factory would have a good result. Hearing these words, everyone present cast a look of gratitude and admiration towards Roan and Henry. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a large group of people appeared in the office area of the special investigation team. These were agents that Potent Burn temporarily transferred from other investigation teams to Roan to help the special investigation team handle this case. Lassie and Mona were responsible for command and assistance, while Roan led an agent into the interrogation room to interrogate undercover Ryan. In front of the evidence, Ryan did not remain silent for long before confessing everything. As Roan had judged before, his ultimate goal was indeed to escape the control of the organized crime investigation department and lead his mother out of the Federation. The general content of the plan was similar to Roan's previous inference, with a few differences. That is, Ryan's mother was not pretending to be with the wild dog Victor, but really had feelings for him, and Ryan also knew about this. This plot about the mother of a friend made Roan scratch his head. He could only say that the atmosphere in the Federation was too free, and this kind of thing was not a big deal in their eyes. Dang. There was a knock on the door of the interrogation room. It was Lassie. Luo An stood up and walked out. What's wrong? We have counted the gains from last night's operation. Lassie handed Luo An a folder. Her face was very excited, but she tried to suppress her excitement and whispered, "In this operation, we seized a total of 850 pounds of meth, nearly 1 ton of cocaine, 93 pounds of conchine, 50 pounds of marijuana, 30 pounds of fentanyl, 20 pounds of carfentanil, and $4.4 million in cash." According to the investigation, about $35 million worth of drugs flow into the streets of Los Angeles every month. The ones we seized last night accounted for about 1/4. Wow, what a big harvest. Luo An raised his eyebrows, turned his head left and right to see if there was anyone around, bent down and whispered in Lassie's ear, "I remember that the FBI regulations stipulate that the action team in this case can get a certain percentage of the reward, right?" "Yes, that's right." Lassie's eyes sparkled, and she nodded repeatedly. After all, the duping case was different from other cases. The risk factor was extremely high, so afterward the FBI high-level officials would always give a certain percentage of the funds gained to reward the operatives. Lassie leaned close to Luo An's ear and whispered, "About 14.5%. These gains are handed over to you." Luo An's eyes also sparkled when he heard this. He returned the folder to Lassie and said in a serious tone, "Be sure to take good care of them." "No problem. Leave it to me." Thinking of the bonus she could get this time, Lassie's eyes flashed with golden light. She agreed without hesitation and then turned around and left. She planned to move a chair to Dupin's place and sit there. She would not leave until the high-level officials received the information. No one could order her to leave. High-level officials. This case involved many people and the content of the case was complicated, so even though Potent Burn sent more than a dozen agents to assist Luo An and the other two, they still spent a whole week. This was because Luo An's reputation had become more popular recently, and other law enforcement agencies were easier to talk to, simplifying some procedures. If the LAPD was efficient, it would take longer, at least more than a month. During this week, Roan did not write a complicated case report as usual, but sorted out a lot of documents that made him feel overwhelmed. There was no way. Roan's identity was different at this time. As the head of the special investigation team, he had to grasp the content related to money and people, and could not let others do it. However, Roan was very smart and hardworking. Although he sorted out these documents slower than a snail at the beginning, The team leader potent burn was so angry that he wanted to do it himself. But with the guidance of a female agent named Michelle, Roan made rapid progress. It took only 3 days to figure out the contents of most of the documents and other things, which made the team leader potent burn stunned. This person, named Michelle Hugo, was an agent who had just joined the special investigation team the day after the operation ended. She was mainly responsible for contacting other law enforcement agencies. She was the director of the FBI Los Angeles branch, and she spent some effort to find someone to give to the special investigation team. After arriving in Los Angeles, Roan handled 2 cases, a bank robbery case and a teenager's death case. The former provided a sum of money to the director of the FBI Los Angeles branch, and the latter's huge amount of readings made the director stand out in front of the Los Angeles media. The director now looks at Roan more kindly than the team leader. In return, the director specially found Michelle Hugo for Roan's special investigation team. Michelle Hugo, 29 years old, has short blonde hair, average figure, average looks, average height, and the level of fighting and shooting is about the same as Mona. But Michelle has a very strong ability. Not only can she take on the task of contacting other law enforcement departments, but she is also proficient in most federal law enforcement departments' various documents, and she writes these documents very quickly. Lassie and Mona combined can't compare with her. On the first day of being transferred to the special investigation team, Michelle finished writing all the documents that had been piled up, sorted them out by category, and handed them over to other departments perfectly according to FBI regulations, which made Roan, Mona and Lassie stunned. It's just a small skill. Michelle took a sip of coffee and asked with a smile, "Are there any other work contents?" Chapter 303, Newcomers who love reading and reviewing their gains. Roan was at a loss for words as to what Michelle said. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation. Seeing that Mona and Lassie didn't know what to say, Roan had to ask back, "What other skills do you have?" "I used to work in the Office of Supervision at the FBI headquarters." Michelle smiled as usual. "I know the regulations of most units such as the FBI, CIA, NSA, National Security Agency, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, etc. I also have some understanding of federal laws, state laws, laws of some well-known regions and cities within the Federation, and regulations of local law enforcement agencies. Therefore, I can help everyone reasonably avoid legal risks in the process of handling cases or other actions." X2. Mona and Lassie looked at them in amazement. After a few seconds of silence, Mona asked, "How did you memorize so many legal provisions?" "It's simple. Just read more books when you have nothing to do." Michelle took out a thick book from the pocket behind him. The title of the book was Emanuel's Essentials of Law. Seeing Mona and Lassie looking at her in surprise, Michelle was a little embarrassed. "I just like reading." According to Michelle's explanation, the reason why she was transferred from the FBI Washington headquarters was because she had already read all the books she was interested in Washington. The Los Angeles Library is very famous and has a very rich collection of books. Michelle's next goal is to finish reading all the books she is interested in the Los Angeles Public Library. This is also the reason why Michelle joined the FBI, because her FBI identity allows her to have the right to view the books collected by most libraries in the federal territory. Of course, Michelle also promised that she would only read books in her free time and would never delay the normal work of the special investigation team. Luo An stood aside, not knowing what to say. Lassie thought for a moment, moved her chair to Michelle's side, and asked in a low voice, "You keep reading like this, don't you have a boyfriend?" "I don't plan to get married. Sexual desire is a low-level human desire. I have very low needs in this regard. For the sake of my health, I only need it once a week, and I can solve it myself." Michelle still had a smile on her face, and her tone and attitude in answering questions did not change at all. Compared to wasting time on relationships between men and women, I prefer reading books. The knowledge in books is the most important to me. Lassie, a guy who would feel uncomfortable if she couldn't see a beautiful girl for a day, heard that Michelle was not mocking her. She really just had this idea. Spreading her hands, Lassie returned to her original position with a speechless face. She had nothing to say. Mona tilted her head and thought for a moment, then asked, "You said just now that you only read books about what you are interested in. What are you interested in? History, music, architecture, law?" Michelle answered more than a dozen of them with great enthusiasm. Except for computers, chemistry, physics and other aspects involving high technology, the rest were almost all included in Michelle's interests. Mona spread her hands speechlessly upon hearing this, and Luo An only sighed with one word, 6. "Since you all have no questions, I have a question to ask." Michelle looked at Luo An and asked, "When will our special investigation team get paid? Are you short of money?" "Yes." Michelle said that she spent her weekly salary according to the plan, most of which was used to buy books. The day before yesterday, she flew to Los Angeles according to the transfer order, but encountered some unexpected situations, and she spent a lot of extra money, so she is a little short of money now. Another one who is short of money. Luo An looked at Mona and Lassie speechlessly, and then without any nonsense, he walked directly into the team leader's office, took out a folder, and said with a smile, "Since you asked, let's distribute the gains of this period today." The eyes of the three women in the office area lit up instantly. Including the newcomer Michelle, the three women in the special investigation team are all senior special agents, with a weekly salary of $750 and a monthly salary of $3,000. Luo An is the deputy team leader, with a weekly salary of $1,000 and a monthly salary of $4,000. In the previous bank robbery case, the three members of the special investigation team received a bonus of $2,000 each, and Luo An's bonus doubled to $4,000. The same is true for this case of the murder of teenagers. Each member of the special investigation team received a bonus of $2,000, and Luo An doubled it to $4,000. In addition to these, the $3 million thank you money for the previous bank robbery has also been received. Lassie took $300,000, Mona took $300,000, and Luo An took $2.4 million. The 14.5% bonus of the exclusive high level has also been calculated and entered into the account of the special investigation team, a total of $1.27 million, Lassie $200,000, Mona $200,000. Luo An $500,000, and the remaining $370,000 entered the special investigation team's case handling funds. So this time Lassie and Mona's gains, weekly wages, are $604,750 respectively, and Luo An's gain is $2,909,000. Luo An did not disclose the total amount of his own earnings, but only handed Mona and Lassie their earnings to them respectively. Seeing Mona smiling happily, and Lassie shouting "Long live Luo An, I love you so much," Michelle was shocked. She had worked in the FBI for 5 or 6 years, and had never seen so many bonuses. Did the special investigation team live on bonuses? "Michelle, this is yours." Michelle took the folder Luo An handed to her in a daze. She looked down, and saw that the amount on it was not $750, but $20,750. Her pupils shrank immediately. After rubbing her eyes and carefully observing twice to make sure she had not seen it wrong, the number on it was really $20,750. Michelle looked up at Luo An hurriedly. "Deputy Team Leader Luo An, did you make a mistake?" "Yes, yes." Waving her hand, Luo An drove the dancing Lassie aside, and picked up a document she had just finished writing on Michelle's desk, pointed at it, and said with a smile, "You did not participate in the previous bank robbery, so you did not get a share of the bonus." Michelle nodded. This was normal. She had been reading books for many years, and had no idea about it. But the later juvenile case. Luo An interrupted her. "This money is not only because you participated in the follow-up processing of the juvenile case, but also because you sorted out the backlog of files of our special investigation team by yourself. Since coming to Los Angeles, Luo An has had a lot of files that he has not had time to deal with, including not only the establishment rules and reports of the special investigation team, some meeting reports, follow-up work reports of bank robberies, handover reports with other departments, follow-up work reports of juvenile cases, and so on. There were so many things, and Roan hadn't thanked him for a single report since he arrived in Los Angeles. Mona and Lassie rolled their eyes at Roan, and they expected it to take 3 days to sort it out. But Michelle finished it all in just one day, and there were almost no mistakes. And Michelle also taught Roan during this period, while submitting the documents to other departments. This money is not given to you personally, but deducted from the $370,000 that just entered the case fund. Roan clearly distinguished between public and private affairs. Michelle joined the juvenile case in the middle, and she did a lot of follow-up work, so it would be inappropriate not to give her a bonus. Moreover, if nothing unexpected happens, the follow-up of each case of the special investigation team in the future will require Michelle as the main force to complete. Patting Michelle's shoulder with a complicated expression, Luo An waved his hand. I said before that, after handling this case, we will have a day off. Today and tomorrow are weekends, and we will have an extra day off on Monday. Ugh. Thank you so much, Luo An. Call me deputy team leader. Michelle sat in the chair, watching this scene, not knowing what to say. After hesitating for a long time, he put away the folder and whispered to himself, thank you. The 2 days of Saturday and the weekend passed in the blink of an eye. Luo An originally planned to go to the Los Angeles beach on Monday to see the scenery and eat some seafood, but he suddenly received a call that night. After pressing the answer button, there was a gunshot from the other end of the phone. Luo An's face changed, and then a familiar male voice came from the phone. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, help. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304, The Murder of the Head of the Second Investigation Team. Sunday, 5:30 p.m. in Luo An's rented apartment. Luo An was very familiar with the voice on the phone. It was a second investigation team leader, Team Leader Owen, who had worked with him on the First Lady bomb case before. Chapter 225. When Luo An first came to Los Angeles, Team Leader Owen had greeted each other. When dealing with the 8 teenagers' corpses case, Team Leader Owen had provided Luo An with a lot of help. They had worked together not long ago. Team Leader Owen was very friendly to Luo An and invited Luo An to his home for dinner many times. So when Luo An heard the gunshot on the phone and Team Leader Owen asking for help, he did not hesitate at all. He immediately sat up from the sofa and ran out of the apartment quickly. Where are you? I'll call for backup for you now. Bang. Before Team Leader Owen could answer his question, a gunshot was heard from the other side of the phone, followed by the sound of the phone falling to the ground and the person falling to the ground. Fouquet. Luo An's face changed, and he slapped the sub hard, but the curse was in a low voice, because the phone was not hung up yet, and perhaps he could hear the movement of the murderer. The sub was unusually quiet, and Luo An looked solemn, listening carefully to the voice coming from the other end of the phone. There was a rustling sound of footsteps, followed by the sound of groping for the body, and then the phone was picked up, paused for a few seconds, and hung up directly. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Luo An's eyes flashed with a cold light. There was only one person's footsteps on the phone, but the gunshots in front could not be made by one person. In addition, the phone paused for a few seconds after it was picked up. Luo An guessed that it should be the person who picked up the phone to ask his teammates what to do, and judged that there were at least 2 people who killed Owen. Driving the sub fast on the road, Luo An looked at the traffic in front of him and thought for a moment. His eyes flashed with a gleam of light, turned the page on the phone, and called the team leader Potent Burn first. The call was quickly connected. This is Potent Burn. Sir, it's me, Roan. Roan said in a deep voice, I'm afraid that team leader Rowan of the number 2 investigation team has been killed. What did you say? Are you sure? Potent Burn was very shocked and asked hurriedly, when? Where? Team leader Owen just called me, and there was a gunshot on the other end of the phone. Rowan briefly described the situation just now, and said in a deep voice, the time was just now, and the location is unknown. Son of. Potent Burn was extremely angry and said directly, I will contact LAPD, and will definitely find team leader Rowan in the shortest time. As soon as the voice fell, without waiting for Rowan to answer, Potent Burn hung up the phone. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Rowan licked his lips and didn't know what he was thinking. After a long pause, he called Mona. Mona went shopping on the streets of Los Angeles with Lassie this afternoon and has not returned yet. It's me, Mona. The phone was picked up quickly. Mona, who had bought a lot of the latest clothes, asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Luo An, do you want me to bring you some food when I go back?" "Sorry, Mona, there was an emergency." Luo An turned the steering wheel to pass several cars and said in a deep voice, "Captain Owen of the number 2 investigation team was probably killed just now. You and Lassie should go back to the special investigation team and find a way to secretly get a copy of Captain Owen's recent work content." "What?" Mona's pupils shrank and her face was full of shock when she heard it, but she immediately agreed. "No problem, we will go back now. By the way, remember to ask Michelle to come with you." Luo An's eyebrows trembled and added, "She may be able to provide you with some help." "Okay." 6 o'clock in the afternoon, a dock in southwest Los Angeles. Luo An was not the first to arrive at the scene. When he drove here, the scene had been cordoned off and nearly 10 LAPD patrolmen were here to control the scene. Taking out the FBI's golden badge to show his identity, Roan lifted the cordon and walked inside to observe the crime scene. A silver Camry was parked next to the container. Roan recognized this car. It was the private car of Team Leader Owen. Team Leader Owen was lying outside the driver's door. The passenger door was opened. Roan walked to his side and found that Team Leader Owen was shot in the right temple. The scene was horrible. "Hello, I'm Sergeant James." Roan bent down and prepared to check other conditions at the scene. A middle-aged white man with a big beard suddenly came over. Seeing the other party's hand extended, Roan stopped and stretched out his hand to shake hands with the other party. "Roan Greenwood. I know you, the deputy team leader of the FBI Special Investigation Team." After shaking hands with Roan, Sergeant James said directly, "The director of the LAPD just called me and asked us to cooperate with you. The head of the FBI investigation team was killed. This is a major case that has not appeared in Los Angeles for a long time." Sheriff James really couldn't figure out who was so bold. "Thank you." Luo An didn't waste any words after hearing that and asked directly, "Did you visit nearby?" A security guard in charge of guarding the dock heard gunshots. Sheriff James took a deep breath, turned around and led Luo An to a place not far away and said, "But the director asked us to cooperate with you, so we suspended the inquiry." Luo An glanced at Sheriff James and said nothing. He walked to the dock security guard and asked, "Can you tell me what you saw?" The dock security guard was a very thin white man who looked to be in his 50s, with a service pistol on his waist. Hearing Luo An's question, he replied, "I was patrolling on the other side of the dock. When the gunshots rang out, I ran here quickly, but I didn't see anyone." Luo An frowned slightly and continued to ask, "Where is the surveillance at the dock?" "It's been broken for half a year." The security guard curled his lips. "Some homeless people nearby come here to steal things, and they always break the surveillance. After it broke more than a dozen times, the Los Angeles government stopped sending people to repair it, and I was the only one patrolling at night. I did the work of 4 people, but they didn't give me a raise." Luo An continued to ask the security guard a few more questions, but didn't get any useful clues, so he let him leave temporarily. At this time, the detectives of the Trace Examination Department and the detectives of the number 2 investigation team all arrived at the scene. Luo An shook hands with the leading detective and handed the scene over to them. The faces of the detectives of the number 2 investigation team were all very ugly, and several female detectives covered their mouths and cried. At this moment, Luo An's mobile phone suddenly rang. He took out his mobile phone and saw that the person who called him was Lassie. "It's me, Roan. Have you found any clues?" Mona just contacted team leader Rowan's wife. Lassie on the other end of the phone said, "I have sent an agent to find her. She will arrive at our office in 20 minutes. Do you want to come back and ask her some questions?" "Okay, I'll be back now." The Trace Inspection Department is in charge of the scene. Roan has nothing to do here, so he might as well go back to the office. 15 minutes later, Roan returned to the Special Investigation Team's office. Mona, Lassie and Michelle were busy at their computers at this time. "You're back just in time, Roan." Seeing Roan push the door and walk into the office, Mona immediately raised her hand to greet him. "I found a little situation here. Chapter 305 Paying for the repair of the bus with your own money. What's going on? Hearing this, Luo An hurried to Mona's side. Our internal data shows that the investigation team's assigned car driven by team leader Rowan was sent to the logistics department for repair a few days ago. Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, pointing to the content inside and said, but the money for this repair was not from the public account of the number 2 investigation team, but from team leader Rowan's own private money. Paying for repairing the investigation team's public car with his own money. Luo An crossed his arms in front of his chest. Team leader Rowan was not a rich man, and he was also a person who was clear about his company on weekdays. There are some unwritten rules within the FBI. Michelle, who was sitting next to Mona, was silent for a few seconds, then looked up and said, if the equipment is repaired with public funds, the content of the documents will be strictly reviewed, and photos will be taken for archiving. If it is a smuggling account, the review will be much simpler, and the document review will not be too strict. Hearing this, Luo An, Mona and Lassie all turned their eyes to Michelle. Michelle smiled slightly when she saw this. Don't forget, I used to work in the prosecutor's office. Michelle said that she had seen a lot of these things, and she was no longer surprised. Mona suddenly realized, and Lassie whispered, what are the benefits of the latter approach? It can mainly erase some, or hide some traces, that are inconvenient for people to know. Michelle did not hide it and answered directly. In addition, there are some small profits in the smuggling account, which can build a good relationship with the logistics department. Lassie was shocked when she heard this. Mona frowned slightly, and Luo An pondered for a while and said, Team leader Rowan should not be for the latter's profits, but most likely for the former, that is, to hide something. That's right. Michelle nodded. She also thought so. Luo An thought about it and said, Michelle, Lassie, you two will go to the logistics department tomorrow to check what team leader Rowan has hidden. Okay. Michelle and Lassie both nodded and agreed. A few minutes later, team leader Rowan's wife was brought here by an agent. Owen's wife is a night nurse named Rebecca. Her eyes were red and tears were rolling in her eyes. Owen and I have been married for 22 years. Rebecca took the tissue handed to her by Lacey and said sobbingly, we were planning to move to Hawaii in 2 years. I'm sorry, Ms. Rebecca. Luo An had met Rebecca before, and Owen had told him that he was very proud to have a kind wife like Rebecca. Team leader Owen was injured when he was young, so he and Rebecca have no children. The two had even discussed the dream of adopting a child. Luo An sighed and whispered to comfort Rebecca for a long time. After seeing that her emotions had calmed down a little, he tentatively asked, Ms. Rebecca, is there anything abnormal in team leader Rowan's life recently? No, it's always the same, nothing abnormal. Rebecca shook her head and said, for so many years, I never went to Owen's study, and I never disturbed him when he was working. Luo An pondered for a few seconds, and continued to ask, what about finances? How is your financial situation? Very normal. Rebecca said, we have no outstanding debts, and the car loan and mortgage have been paid off long ago. We don't have any financial problems. Okay. Glancing at Michelle next to him, Luo An continued to ask, we found out that team leader Owen had some problems with his car at work some time ago. Do you know about this? I know about this. Rebecca nodded and said, Owen told me about this. He said that, when he was driving some time ago, a bird flew onto the front windshield and broke the glass, which scared him. But, Rowan, Mona, Lassie, and Michelle looked at each other and saw the suspicion in each other's eyes. After a few seconds of silence, Rowan coughed lightly and prepared to continue asking questions. At this moment, the door of the special investigation team was suddenly pushed open, and several familiar figures suddenly strode in. Sorry Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, we can solve Team Leader Rowan's case, so we won't bother you. Rowan and the other three turned their heads and found that the visitors were the 4 agents Lucerne, Jack, Evie, and Hayes from the second investigation team. Lucerne was the leader of the 4, followed by Jack and Hayes, and Evie stood at the end, looking at Rowan and the others with a complicated look. When Rowan and Mona killed the mercenaries on the mountain road in Los Angeles, it was Evie who brought the agents to help the two deal with the scene and the aftermath. Evie was the one who witnessed Rowan's skills and methods with her own eyes. Ivy was very shocked at the time. Later, she learned that Roan had solved the 4 robbers in the bank robbery case alone and was unharmed. Ivy's shock to Roan turned directly into worship and admiration. Ivy was very sad when she learned that team leader Roan was killed. Her eyes are still red. However, when she learned that Roan appeared at the scene and took over the case, although Ivy was still sad, she felt much more at ease. She believed in the skills and abilities of Deputy Team Leader Roan Greenwood, and believed that Roan could lead the special investigation team to find the murderer who killed Team Leader Owen. When she heard Luo An say that Team Leader Owen was the leader of their number 2 investigation team, and this case belonged to the number 2 investigation team, and they had to investigate and solve it by themselves, Ivy opened her mouth several times to say something. Having worked in the number 2 investigation team for so long, Ivy was very clear about the case handling level of Luo An and Jack. When Team Leader Owen was there, they could still solve the case smoothly under the leadership of Team Leader Owen. Now that Team Leader Owen is gone, Ivy feels that it will take at least 3 to 4 times as long as before for Luo An and his team to handle the case, and it is still unknown whether they can succeed. However, Luo An put too much pressure on her, and the other agents in the number 2 investigation team also supported Luo An. Ivy's position in the number 2 investigation team was not high. She was silent for a long time, and finally did not dare to speak out her thoughts. Ivy also made other plans. If the case was handed over to the number 2 investigation team, it would be easy to find the murderer. If the murderer was not found, she would submit an application to Luo An's special investigation team to see if she could be transferred to the special investigation team. Then she would find a way to let Luo An take over the case again, and finally catch the murderer who killed Team Leader Owen and avenge Team Leader Owen. Luo An of the number 2 investigation team did not know that there was a guy who doubted his ability behind him. He always believed in his ability to handle cases. What's more, Team Leader Owen was the leader of their number 2 investigation team. If the case was handed over to the special investigation team, how would others see him? Luo An has always regarded himself as the deputy head of the second investigation team for a long time. So when he walked into the special investigation team's office, Luo An didn't say anything nonsense. He walked directly to Rebecca, took her hand, and prepared to walk out. "Mrs. Rebecca, believe me, I will find the murderer who killed Team Leader Owen and avenge him." Chapter 306, Leaving in Disgrace, 20 million jewelry counterfeiting case. Special investigation team, office area. Luo An spoke and walked very quickly. Before Rebecca, who was in tears, could react, he pulled her up from her chair. "What are you doing? What do you mean?" Seeing this, Mona and Lass's faces suddenly changed. They immediately left their chairs and reached out to stop each other. Michelle didn't say anything, but stood up silently and blocked behind Luo An. Seeing the 3 beautiful women trying to stop him, Luo An grinned disdainfully and turned his body to use his shoulder to push them away. The next second, a sharp pain suddenly came from his right wrist. Luo An's face twisted instantly, and he subconsciously let go of the hand holding Mrs. Rebecca. Luo An, who reacted, hurriedly turned back and found that it was Luo An who reached out and clamped his wrist. After pulling Rebecca behind him and handing her over to Mona and Lassie, Luo An said expressionlessly, "Team Leader Owen just passed away, and you treat his wife like this. You are really a good subordinate of Team Leader Owen." The pain in his right wrist made Luo An take a breath of cold air. He looked at Luo An with surprise, not understanding why Luo An's hand was so strong. Then he heard Luo An's words, and Luo An was immediately angry. "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, don't say these words to sow discord. Team Leader Owen is the leader of our number 2 investigation team. He passed away, and the case must be investigated by us." While speaking, Luo An took a step back and tried to pull his right hand out of Luo An's hand. But until Luo An's face turned red, his right hand was still firmly clamped by Luo An. Just as Luo An's face was filled with anger and he stretched out his left hand to attack Luo An raised his eyebrows slightly and suddenly released his right hand. Bang! Luo An hadn't retracted his right hand from pulling back, but the inertia of Roan's sudden release made his whole body still move backward, so he sat down on the ground without reacting. Mona and Lassie burst out laughing. Michelle didn't laugh out loud, but her eyes curved slightly, and she raised her hand to cover her mouth. Agent Jack and Agent Hayes from the second investigation team looked at Luo An with a strange look, and Agent Evie wanted to laugh, but was too embarrassed to do so she could only turn her head and purse her lips. Rebecca, the protagonist being fought over by both sides, also reacted at this time, glared at Luo An, whom she didn't like very much on weekdays, and sat back in the chair of the special investigation team. Feeling the gazes of everyone in the office looking at him, Luo An, who was sitting on the ground, trembled with his lips, and his hair was about to explode with anger. He immediately stood up and wanted to pounce on Roan, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. Roan's eyes were full of disdain, and his right hand behind his back silently clenched into a fist. Luo An, what are you doing? At this moment, the shout of the team leader Potent Burn suddenly came from the door of the special investigation team. Luo An's movement suddenly froze, and Luo An raised his eyebrows and calmly let go of his right hand that was clenched behind his fist. What are you doing here? Potent Burn walked into the office area with a dark face. Evie and Jack hurriedly made way for him. Luo An also hurriedly turned back and said, "Sir, we are here to deal with the murder case of Team Leader Owen. This case is in the charge of the special investigation team. You just need to assist." The last call before Team Leader Owen died was not made to his subordinates in the second investigation team, but to Luo An, the deputy head of the special investigation team. Potent Burn, who spent most of his first half of his life in intrigue, would never believe that this was just because Team Leader Owen pressed the button when he made the call, or some other accident. Thinking of this, Potent Burn looked at Luo An with an unfriendly face and waved his hand. "Go back to your number 2 investigation team. Team Leader Owen has passed away. Your investigation team still has several cases that have not been solved. Hurry up and deal with those cases." Luo An's face flushed, but Potent Burn immediately turned his head with a gloomy face. "Huh. Okay, sir." Luo An was silent for a few seconds, and finally left the special investigation team with Jack and the other 2 in disgrace. HMPH. Looking at Luo An's back, Potent Burn snorted coldly, then turned around and handed Roan a folder, saying, "These are all the cases that Team Leader Rowan has investigated in the past year. The information in it may be helpful in finding the murderer who killed Team Leader Owen." Roan took the folder. "Thank you, sir." Potent Burn said nothing, walked to Rebecca and whispered, "Ms. Rebecca, this is Team Leader Owen's superior, Potent Burn. I'm sorry about Team Leader Owen, but I promise you that we will catch the murderer who killed Team Leader Owen." "Thank you." Rebecca nodded, her eyes red again. After comforting him briefly, Potent Burn took Roan to the side and whispered, "Roan, this case is very serious. The director will hold a press conference on this case tomorrow, so you must solve it. If you need help or encounter any problems, send me a message immediately, understand?" "No problem." Roan agreed. He was a little confused now. What was the reason for the murderer to kill Team Leader Owen? Killing a team leader of the FBI investigation team represented a provocation to the federal law enforcement agency, which would only cause a crazy counterattack from the FBI. Who is so brave? The next day, Monday, 10 o'clock in the morning, Michelle pushed open the door of the special investigation team's office, shook the folder in her hand, and said, "The autopsy report of Team Leader Rowan is out, and the fatal wound is the gunshot wound on his temple." Luo An, who was sorting things with his head down, looked up and asked, "Has the bullet been tested for ballistics?" "It has been done, but unfortunately, the gun that killed Team Leader Owen was a black gun, and there is no information about this gun in the FBI's internal documents." Michelle sat back in her chair, picked up the coffee, and took a sip. In addition, the trace examination department carefully examined the seabed near the dock where the crime occurred, and found a lot of black guns involved in other cases, but did not find the gun that killed Team Leader Owen. "Okay." Luo An turned to look at Mona. "How is your investigation going?" "In the files that Potent Burn brought last night, I found several murderers who may be suspected of killing Team Leader Owen." Mona tapped on the keyboard with her 10 fingers, and several suspects soon appeared on the computer desktop. 4 months ago, Team Leader Rowan led people to solve a jewelry counterfeiting case worth 20 million. Roan rested his hand on his chin and shook his head. The purpose of fraud is just to make money. They don't want to dirty their hands. There is no need, and they don't have the courage, to kill the head of the FBI investigation team. What about this? Mona pointed to the second paragraph and continued. 11 months ago, team leader Rowan led people to destroy a branch of a white supremacist organization that committed first-degree murder. These people will not delay revenge for so long. They will definitely take action immediately to express their attitude. Rowan continued to shake his head. Anything else? There are 2 others. Mona was about to continue reading aloud when Lassie pushed open the door of the investigation team and walked in. Everyone, I have found out that team leader Rowan paid for the repair of the bus himself. Chapter 307 4 questions, clues, and suspects. Hearing Lassie's words, Luo An immediately asked, what's going on? Mona and Michelle also cast a questioning look. This is a photo. Lassie did not answer, but directly took out the photo of team leader Rowan's bus before the repair and put it in front of everyone. Luo An and the other 2 looked down and found that there were 7 or 8 cracks in the front windshield of team leader Rowan's bus in the photo, and the glass was facing inward, with a hole the size of a baby's fist. Mona grinned. Could this be done by a bird? Lassie drank the coffee in the cup in one gulp and continued. Maybe there is an explosive pack tied to the bird. Michelle next to her added, the question now is, team leader Rowan's bus was shot. Not only did he not report the incident, why did he lie about it? Maybe team leader Rowan knows the person who shot him, or he knows who shot him. Luo An answered casually, folded his hands in front of his chest, narrowed his eyes, and bowed his head to ponder. After thinking for a moment, Luo An suddenly thought of something, and looked up and asked Lassie, by the way, how did you get this photo? It seemed that the logistics side was not easy to reveal things that involved their interests. It's all thanks to Michelle. Lassie put her arm around Michelle's shoulders and said with a smile, she taught me to say something that the agents in the logistics department couldn't refuse. Mona looked at Michelle in surprise, and Michelle smiled slightly. I used to work in the prosecutor's office, and I've dealt with this kind of thing, so I know how to deal with those people. And Lassie is very smart and learns quickly. She remembered it after I only said it once. Glancing at Lassie, who was proud with her hands on her hips, Rowan coughed lightly, walked to the front of the office area, picked up a pen, and wrote on the whiteboard that the number 4 investigation team had borrowed, but had not returned, and said, everyone, we have a few questions that we haven't figured out now. First, why did team leader Rowan's bus get shot, but he concealed it? Second, why did team leader Rowan's last call before his death ask me for help? Third, what was the reason for team leader Rowan's murder? Revenge or something else? At this point, Rowan's eyes flashed, and he suddenly thought of something, and asked while writing. And fourth, why did team leader Rowan go to the dock in southwest Los Angeles last night, and what did he do there? Hearing Rowan's fourth question, Mona raised her hand and answered, I have checked the surveillance cameras in the dock area, and found no abnormal situation or abnormal vehicles. Michelle and Lassie frowned and fell silent. Rowan threw the whiteboard pen aside, thought for a while, and asked, have you checked the call records of team leader Rowan? Call records? Mona shook her head in surprise, then quickly moved her chair back to her computer. I'll start checking now. Okay. Rowan continued to say to Lassie and Michelle, Lassie, Michelle, you go to the office of the head of the second investigation team now, and bring all the office supplies and personal belongings of team leader Rowan to us. No problem. The 2 nodded, got up and left the special investigation team. There were not many supplies for team leader Rowan in the office of the head of the second investigation team. In addition to some case reports and files, there were not many other items. Rowan, Lassie and Michelle sat together, looking through team leader Rowan's belongings bit by bit, and time soon came to noon. After lunch, Mona was busy in front of her computer for a while, and then suddenly raised her hand. Everyone, I found a clue. Luo An and the other 2 immediately moved their chairs to Mona. What clue? Some call records with different phone numbers, but the same location. Mona typed on the keyboard for a while, and a series of phone numbers and a map suddenly appeared on the computer. She pointed at these and explained, since half a year ago, team leader Rowan has had many calls with different disposable phones. The time of contact between the 2 is not fixed, but the number of contacts is fixed. twice a month. The reason why I believe that there is the same person behind these different disposable phones is that, although the numbers of these disposable phones are different, the location of each call is the same and has never changed. Whether it is an ordinary phone or a disposable phone, their working method is to transmit signals to the base station, and the base station sends signals to contact others far away. Although the person who contacted Team Leader Rowan changed disposable mobile phones many times, the base station that sent his signal was always the same, which means that the other party never changed his location when making a call. But we can't be sure that the other party is the same person. Lassie raised her own question. Could it be that there is a store selling disposable phones in that area, and those people bought the phones and called Team Leader Rowan directly there? Lassie's voice became lower and lower as she spoke, because she found that the possibility she said was even lower than what Mona said. The analysis makes sense. Don't analyze it again in the future. Rowan patted Lassie's shoulder, looked at Mona, and asked, "Are there any other discoveries?" Mona laughed and said proudly, "Of course. And I can already answer the fourth question you wrote on the whiteboard." Mona enlarged the map on the computer screen and explained, "I checked the people who had contact with Team Leader Rowan in the area where the signal base station is located, and successfully found a middle-aged white man named Pearson. This Pearson is also an FBI, working in the Criminal Justice Information Department in Los Angeles. He graduated from the same police academy as Team Leader Rowan, and the two were classmates. Team Leader Rowan called him before he called you, Rowan, last night. Not only that, when Team Leader Rowan drove to the dock, Pearson also drove away from home. Pearson's driving route was a bit roundabout, deliberately avoiding many surveillance cameras, but the final direction was the southwest dock of Los Angeles. Criminal Justice Department, the same department as Augustus. After listening to the clues found by Mona, Lassie smacked her lips and analyzed. Could it be that Team Leader Rowan accidentally handled a wrongful case, and the victim came to him for revenge after being released from prison? Luo An stood up and stretched, patting Lassie's shoulder. "Lassie, I feel that you should go to Hollywood to be a screenwriter. How can being a screenwriter make money like working under you?" Lassie chuckled. She had roughly figured out the structure of Hollywood during this period of time. The status of editors there is not ordinary low. A movie box office is tens of millions, and those who can get 500,000 are the best screenwriters in the industry. Most editors only have a few $100s a month, and it is a problem to survive. Standing up from the chair, Lassie asked, "Shall we go find this person next?" "Of course." Luo An motioned Michelle to stay in the office area and continue to look for Team Leader Rowan's office supplies, and then walked into the equipment room with Lassie. "Let's go visit this Mr. Pearson and ask him what he talks about when he and Team Leader Rowan talk on the phone every month." Chapter 308, Gunshots. Booby trap. Lassie in a cold sweat. In a community in southern Los Angeles, Rowan and Lassie slowly parked the SUV on the side of the road, checked their equipment, and walked to Pearson's second floor apartment. Pushing open the gate, Lassie grinned at the lawn on the ground. "Wow, it looks like our Mr. Pearson is very rich." Rowan didn't know much about lawns, and asked casually after hearing Lassie's words, "Why? This is a very expensive lawn on the market in Los Angeles." Lassie bent down and pulled off a blade of grass. "It would probably cost tens of thousands of dollars to make such a large lawn." "That's really rich." Rowan grinned. Although he has a lot of money now, he is not used to the extravagant, wasteful, corrupt, and decadent life of the rich in federal capitalism. Rowan has the money to spend tens of thousands of dollars on lawns, but he doesn't think it's necessary. The two walked towards the door of the apartment while talking. Lassie's right foot just stepped on the stairs at the door, and suddenly a gunshot came from inside the apartment. Bang. Fouquet. The sudden gunshot scared Rowan and Lassie. After reacting, Lassie's face changed, and she took out her pistol and prepared to rush into the apartment. "Wait a minute." But just as Lassie was about to take a step forward with her right leg, Luo An suddenly felt the feeling of water burning under her buttocks again, so he quickly reached out and grabbed Lassie. Lassie paused and hurriedly turned back and asked, "What's wrong?" Luo An's eyebrows trembled. He thought there was a gunman nearby who was going to attack the two of them, so he was ready to find obstacles with Lassie to avoid. But as soon as Lassie retracted her right leg, the feeling of her buttocks being burned by fire disappeared instantly. Luo's mind turned quickly, and he immediately realized that there might be something wrong with the apartment in front of him. Turning on the emotional perception in his mind, Luo only felt the panic of Lassie in front of him, but he did not sense any emotions in the apartment, neither cold and evil feelings nor warm and good feelings. In other words, there were no living people in the apartment at this time, but there were things that could be fatal. In an instant, Luo figured it all out. He took a tentative step forward and found that the burning feeling on his butt came again. Without saying anything, Luo immediately motioned Lassie to walk with him to the back door of the apartment. Lassie was a little confused, but she always trusted Luo's judgment when encountering an enemy, so she followed Luo in a vigilant posture and quickly followed. Slowly approaching the back door of the apartment, Luo breathed a sigh of relief without feeling the burning feeling on his butt. Bang! Crash! Breaking the glass with a punch, Luo reached out and grabbed the handle from the inside and twisted the back door of the apartment little by little. Seeing this scene, Lassie's mouth twitched. Luo, you. Before she finished speaking, Lassie suddenly saw Luo pointing his finger at the front door of the apartment. Subconsciously, she looked in the direction he pointed. The next second, Lassie instantly took a breath of cold air. I saw that there were 2 booby traps under the handle of the front door of the apartment. As long as someone breaks into the apartment, the 2 booby traps will explode instantly. Son of, eat. Lassie cursed, and a layer of cold sweat instantly broke out on her back when she thought about how she almost pushed the door and broke into the apartment. At *%. Reaching out to wipe the cold sweat from her forehead, Lassie looked at Luo with gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, Luo. Call me deputy team leader. Luo smiled and waved his hand. Thinking of the previous emotional perception that there was no living person in the apartment, but there was a gunshot, so he immediately took a guard posture and slowly walked to the second floor of the apartment. Lassie glared at the booby trap at the front door again, raised her pistol, and followed Luo. As soon as she entered the second floor, Luo's sensitive nose smelled a strong smell of blood. After checking back to back with Lassie to confirm that no one was hiding in other rooms, Luo stood by the door of the last bedroom, raised his pistol and slowly pushed open the bedroom door. A strong smell of blood instantly burst out of the room. The first thing that caught Luo and Lassie's eyes was a chair with its back to the 2 of them, and a person sitting on the chair with his head down. The 2 approached slowly with guns in hand, and walked to the side of the chair. They saw each other's face clearly, and it was their target, Pearson. Pearson's cause of death was a hole in his forehead, made by a bullet. The blood was very fresh, and it should have been caused by the gunshot just now. But Ron and Mona both saw that the range of the muzzle on Pearson's forehead was not right, which meant that the other party had been shot in the forehead a long time ago, and the shot just now was just another shot in the bullet hole in the forehead. Opposite Pearson, there was a table with a pistol on it. The trigger of the pistol was set with a very clever structure. As long as someone walked into the front of the apartment, the trigger of the gun would be lightly pulled down by the mechanical mechanism. When the gunshots were heard from upstairs, except for passers-by, the first reaction of the people who came here to investigate was mostly to rush into the villa to check the situation. Then the booby trap at the front door of the apartment would be triggered, and the intruders would be killed. Most of this apartment is made of wood, and flames would rise and burn instantly. Luo put away the Glock 18, looked at the mechanical structure in front of him and exclaimed, a smart guy not only understands mechanical structure, but also understands human psychology. He is a talent. Motherfu. Ah. Hearing Luo's words, Lassie, who had walked on the line between life and death, and had her back soaked with cold sweat, cursed loudly. She wished she could shoot the guy who designed this structure right now. Call the trace inspection department. After Lassie vented a few words and calmed down, Luo smiled and said, let them come here to deal with the scene. There should be few people in Los Angeles who can design this kind of delay mechanism. I'm afraid we will find the murderer soon. Okay. Lassie nodded, took out her mobile phone, and started to call. After contacting the trace inspection department, she hung up the phone, pondered for a few seconds, looked up and asked, Luo An, how did you find those booby traps at the front door? Intuition. Luo An turned and left the bedroom, smiling. I always believe in my intuition. Looking at Luo An's back, Lassie hurriedly followed, pouting and whispering to herself, isn't it said that women's intuition is the most accurate? Is there something wrong with me or Luo An? Half an hour later, the detectives from the trace inspection department arrived at the scene. When they saw the booby traps at the front door of the apartment, they also broke out in cold sweat. After trying their best to dismantle the mechanical structures and booby traps in the apartment, the detectives from the trace inspection department looked at Luo An with moved eyes and full of admiration. Luo An reached out his hand and shook hands with the leading trace examination agent, smiling, thank you for your hard work. It's my duty. The two sides exchanged a few simple pleasantries and drove back to the Jacob Federal Building together. Returning to the office area of the Special Investigation Team, it was not long before it was time to get off work, and Luo An and the other four left and went back to their homes. Together with Mona, they bought some fruits and flowers outside, and Luo An and the other two returned to their rented apartment with laughter. After inserting the key and opening the door, Mona walked in with a smile on her face, but the next second after Luo An entered the room, his smile disappeared, and his face instantly became gloomy. Chapter 309 Luo An, someone sneaked into our apartment. Luo An and Mona rented an apartment. I want to eat Oriental food tonight. Luo An, you cook and I wash the dishes. Mona was in a good mood today. When the door of the apartment was opened, she walked in humming a song and arranged dinner for tonight. Snap. The next second, Mona suddenly felt her arm being tightly held by Luo An. Thinking of some crazy behaviors they had done before, she hurriedly twisted her body to break free from him. No. Luo An, I'm hungry. At least you should close the door first. Reaching out to close the door, Mona's words made Luo An speechless. Why did he feel like he was not a good person? But Roan didn't mean that when he pulled Mona back. He slapped her, but hard to make her quiet down, and then he whispered in Mona's ear, something is wrong with the room. Someone has come in. Huh. Hearing this, Mona instantly stopped twisting in Roan's arms, and her expression instantly became serious. She whispered, are you sure? Yeah. Roan didn't say much, but just pointed at the two windows in the living room and a small piece of thin wire on the top of the apartment door. The small apartment Mona bought was sneaked into by a gunman. Although the gangster was caught by Roan, it still left some psychological trauma on Mona. Since then, every time Mona leaves home, she will follow what she learned in the FBI training academy and place some small items, such as toothpicks and thin wires, in the windows and door cracks, in advance to prevent someone from sneaking into the room. In Luo An's opinion, Mona's anti-reconnaissance ability is really average. If it were him, he would have several ways to sneak into Mona's room and put those small things back to their original places afterwards, so that Mona would not find anything unusual. The two began to live together, and during a break in a certain sports game, they talked about this. So Luo An taught Mona shirtless and tested Mona's learning results. The process took a long time, but the result was not very good. Mona still didn't learn much. For Mona's sense of security, Luo An designed the room's warning props by himself. This habit started in New York and continued to Los Angeles. So following Luo An's guidance, Mona saw that the fake toothpick warning small items on the left window of the living room were still in place, but the real thin wire warning items had disappeared. Shit. Mona cursed in a low voice, and then looked at Luo An with a serious face. What should we do next? Check the room carefully to see if anything is missing. Luo An's eyes flashed coldly, patted Mona's shoulder, and the two immediately went into their own rooms to check. There weren't many things in Luo An's bedroom, and he always paid attention to details, so he quickly checked his room and found nothing missing. Mona's bedroom had a lot of things, and two closets were full not long after arriving in Los Angeles. After Luo An checked his room, he went into her bedroom to check together. 10 minutes later, the two finished the check and there was nothing missing in Mona's bedroom. Seeing this, Mona frowned and guessed, so, did that guy want to come to our place to find something, but didn't find it, so he left. She and Luo An are both serious people and don't have the habit of writing diaries. Don't forget, we have other rooms. Luo An shook his head, left Mona's bedroom, and walked into the study next to it. Seeing this, Mona didn't say much, turned around and walked into the kitchen on the other side. Soon, Mona finished searching the kitchen, which didn't have many things. Just as she was about to continue searching the living room, Luo An's voice suddenly called from the bathroom. "Mona, come here for a moment." "Why is it the bathroom?" Seeing this, Mona frowned. "What can be stolen in the bathroom?" "No, you are wrong, Mona. That guy is giving us gifts." Luo An walked out of the bathroom with a sneer in his hand, holding a purple notebook that was as big as a homework book but very thin. Handing it to Mona, Luo An added, "I found it in the thin interlayer on the top of the bathroom." Seeing the purple notebook handed over by Luo An, Mona's face was not good, but when she opened the book and saw the contents inside, Mona's face was shocked. "Overseas accounts?" "Yes." Luo An sat down on the sofa in the living room. He did have some accounts outside the Federation, which contained the $300 million he had obtained before. However, the account numbers and passwords of those accounts were firmly memorized by Luo An. He lacked a sense of security and felt that things written on paper could never be kept secret, so he never wrote down those accounts. This was the first time that Luo An had seen overseas bank accounts in the purple booklet. He didn't know where they came from. It's probably stolen goods. Seeing Mona's serious face and frowning expression, Luo An grabbed her arm, pulled her into his arms, and smiled. "I just don't know who wants to frame me. It's the case of Team Leader Owen. Mona is not stupid. She and Luo An have not offended anyone since they came to Los Angeles. The only possibility is that they took over the murder case of Team Leader Owen these 2 days. Owen is the head of the investigation team of the FBI Criminal Investigation Division, which can be regarded as a middle-level manager of the FBI. For such a person to be killed, either the murderer really doesn't care about Owen's identity as the head of the investigation team, or the mastermind really doesn't care about Owen's identity as the head of the investigation team. This afternoon, Luo An and Lassie went to Pearson's house and encountered a booby trap. Lassie also told Mona that the mastermind was obviously planning to kill people. Thinking of this, Mona broke away from Luo An's arms, stood up, and said seriously, "Luo An, why don't we hand this case over to other investigation teams?" "What?" Luo An was surprised. Just as he was about to ask, Mona covered his mouth and said in a serious but calm tone, "Luo An, there is obviously a bottomless pool behind this case. We don't need to risk our lives to investigate. Mona is a woman first, and then the FBI. She doesn't want to see the man she loves being framed and sent to prison because of such a thing. Mona, whose father works in the CIA, is very aware of the filth deep in the federal government agencies, but Mona didn't care before. Anyway, it didn't provoke her. But now the man she loves is being targeted by the filth. Mona can't hold it anymore. Her subconscious thought is to throw the trouble away. She just wants the man she loves to be fine." Seeing Mona frowning, Luo An didn't say much, but just reached out and pulled her over and kissed her. Time passed by, and the two let go of each other. Mona raised her head and stared at Luo An. "You promised me?" "Sorry." Luo An shook his head and didn't promise Mona. Mona's face suddenly showed anger. Just as she was about to speak, Luo An covered her mouth like Mona before. "Mona, the other party has already taken things to our house. Do you think they will let us go, even if we take a step back? Tolerance and retreat cannot solve any problems." Luo An knows this truth very well. Only by knocking the other party down, making them afraid, beating them to submission, and beating them to death, can the fundamental problem be solved. Believe me, Mona, we can handle this case. With the purple book in his hand, Luo An's eyes flashed with a cold light. He is now more and more interested in what case Team Leader Owen was investigating before his death, and what is behind this case. Chapter 310 The sudden appearance of the supervisory department. The next morning, in the office area of the special investigation team, Mona sat at her desk, tapping the computer keyboard with a displeased look on her face. Lassie lowered her head and continued to look for the office supplies of Team Leader Owen. Roan sat in another empty chair, drinking tea and silently recalling the details of the case. What Roan can be sure of now is that team leader Rowan and his police academy classmate Pearson were definitely killed by the mastermind because they knew some problems. Roan is not in a hurry to think about what the two of them knew about the problem. Someone will take the initiative to send clues later. What Roan is thinking now is that team leader Rowan, who is so meticulous, must have hidden the clues of that matter. But where are the clues hidden? Have they been stolen or robbed by the mastermind? Team leader Rowan's home. Lassie had carefully checked it when she sent Ms. Rebecca home last night and did not find anything hidden. Michelle also checked the items in team leader Rowan's office and also did not find any hidden items. Luo An took a sip of the teacup and whispered to himself, could it really have been taken away by the mastermind behind the scenes? Everyone. At this moment, Michelle pushed open the door of the investigation team and walked in, waving the documents in his hand. The autopsy report of Pearson, the booby traps and mechanical structures in Pearson's home, etc., have all been checked by the trace examination department. Hearing about the booby trap, Lassie still gritted her teeth. She is only in her 30s this year, and there are still many girls waiting for her. Lassie doesn't want to die young. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An handed Michelle a cup of coffee, took the folder, and began to check it. The trace examination department did not find any fingerprints or footprints of others in Pearson's home. The specific cause of Pearson's death was consistent with Luo An's previous judgment. He was indeed shot in the forehead before. The gunshot he and Lassie heard was just a device to lure the two anxious people to open the door of the apartment, and they were never killed by booby traps. The mechanical device in the apartment is indeed very clever, and ordinary people can't make it at all. The trace examination department stated in the report that there are two guys in the FBI database who can make such mechanical devices. One of them is currently studying in a prison in Los Angeles, and the other has gone to chat with God because of a car accident 2 years ago. Let's go to the prison to interrogate that guy. After Luo An finished reading the report, Lassie also took it to take a look, and then clenched his fists, making a creaking sound, with a fierce look on his face. Ask that guy in prison, who did he pass the technology to? For some ambitious people, the federal prison is a very good place, because they can learn new knowledge in it, that they cannot learn outside, but can make a fortune. Luo An closed the folder, and put it aside, picked up the teacup, and took a sip slowly, no hurry. This scene made Lassie's forehead full of black lines, and question marks appeared in her head. What do you mean no hurry? That guy must be related to the booby trap that almost killed us. Why don't we interrogate him? Luo An wanted to make up a random reason to prevaricate Lassie, but as soon as he opened his mouth, he suddenly remembered something and stopped talking. With a gleam of light in his eyes, he lowered his head and pondered for a few seconds. Then Luo An put the teacup aside, suddenly stretched out his hand, and pulled the confused Lassie in front of him, and whispered, Lassie, I have a task for you. You must do it by yourself. You must be careful in the process, and must not attract anyone's attention. Hearing this, Lassie's face was puzzled, and then her face darkened a little. After listening to Luo An's words, she whispered, are you sure? Not sure. Luo An shook his head and replied, but this is the biggest possibility I can think of. Okay, leave it to me. The matter was of great importance, and among the 4 people of the special investigation team, only she was suitable for this task. Lassie nodded and agreed without hesitation. She went to the equipment room for a few minutes, then pushed open the door of the investigation team and left quickly. Roan and Lassie were talking in low voices, and neither Mona nor Michelle heard what they said. Seeing Lassie leave the office area, Mona turned around and asked, what did you ask Lassie to do? It's just a little thing. Roan picked up the teacup again. Seeing this, Michelle stopped asking about this, and asked another question. What is the direction of our next work? Roan thought for a moment and said, Mona, check Pearson's work content and interpersonal relationships. Michelle, go to the FBI database and check the identity information of the prisoner in the prison, who can make the mechanical structure of the booby trap, and the specific content of the case in which he was imprisoned. Mona rolled her eyes at Roan, and turned to work. Michelle agreed with a smile. No problem. Time passed by minute, and soon Pearson's information was completely checked by Mona, and the information of the prisoner in the prison was also checked by Michelle. Just as Roan was about to check the computer screen, there was a knock on the door of the special investigation team. Luo An casually said, "Come in." As soon as he finished speaking, the door of the special investigation team was pushed open, and 5 white men in suits and leather shoes, with a blue badge on their chests and serious faces walked in. Moan looked up in confusion, and Michelle's pupils shrank. Without waiting for Luo An to ask, the middle-aged white man in the lead revealed his identity. "Hello, I'm Horst from the Supervision Department. Deputy Team Leader Luo An Greenwood. We need your cooperation on something. Please come with us." Supervision Department? Hearing this, Luo An's expression did not change, but Moan looked solemn and turned back to look at Michelle. Michelle stood up and walked to Roan's side, looked at Horst, and said in a neither humble nor arrogant manner, "According to Article 19 of the 3rd Rule of the Ombudsman's Office's Work Guidelines, when there is a situation that requires the cooperation of FBI management personnel, and the specific content of the cooperation must be clearly stated to the other party in person. Roan Greenwood is the deputy head of our special investigation team. He exercises the power of the head when the head is absent and is one of the management personnel in the regulations. So, please make it clear why you are coming to our deputy head of the special investigation team this time. Otherwise Deputy Head Roan Greenwood has the right to refuse your request." Michelle's words made Roan and Mona look at her with new eyes, and several agents of the supervision department looked at her with a hint of surprise. Michelle Davis, former agent of the FBI Washington headquarters prosecutor's office. Horst was not very surprised. He had investigated the files of everyone in the special investigation team before coming here. So when he heard what Michelle said, Horst's expression remained unchanged, and he said directly without any nonsense, "According to our investigation, the bullet that killed Criminal Justice Department agent Pearson and caused his death came from one of the guns of a gunman in the William Mars gang. Some time ago, when your special investigation team was dealing with the William Mars gang, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood found 2 of the guns. We suspect that Deputy Team Leader Greenwood secretly hid the other guns." What? Hearing this, Michelle subconsciously turned back to look at Roan, and Mona's pupils trembled, realizing something. Roan was not panicked at all when he heard this, and looked at Michelle, and asked with a smile, "Michelle, I have a question about the rules I would like to ask you." Michelle, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311 Clues in the Hands of the Supervisory Department. Hearing what Roan said, Michelle hurriedly said, "What's the problem?" "A small problem." Roan looked at Horst in front of him. "Do I have the authority to ask the team leader Potenbein, you, and Mona, to go to the inspection department with me?" Horst's brows twitched slightly when he heard this, and several agents behind him frowned, and one of them was about to interrupt Michelle. Michelle ignored him and nodded. "According to Article 22, you have this power. But when you are being interrogated, we can only watch and cannot help you answer questions." "It's okay, you can go if you can." Luo An nodded with satisfaction, looking at the agent behind Horst and grinning. "I'm just a little worried that the supervision department will use unclean means to interrogate me, and I need some people to watch and testify." "You." The agents behind Horst changed their faces when they heard this, but were blocked by Horst's hand, and asked coldly, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, when do you plan to leave with us?" "Michelle, go call the team supervisor Potenbein." Luo An patted Michelle on the shoulder and asked her to go out and call people, then spread his hands. "I'll go with you when the team supervisor comes." After that, Luo An ignored the attitude of these guys, turned around and pulled Mona to the depths of the office area and whispered, "Mona, I have something to entrust to you." Mona, who was anxious and had realized something, wanted to speak, but Roan covered her mouth. Roan whispered, "You will stay in the special investigation team. Except for me and Lassie, no one can enter the gate. If the other party tries to force their way in, just shoot." Mona wanted to ask Michelle or Potent Burn, but when she saw the cold light in Roan's eyes, she realized something, hesitated for a few seconds, and nodded silently. Roan breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "Believe me." "Yeah." Mona didn't say much, but kissed Roan's mouth gently in a direction that the group of agents couldn't see. Team leader Potent Burn arrived soon, and his face was extremely ugly when he saw Horst and his group. But seeing Roan grinning at him, Potent Burn suppressed his anger and said coldly to Horst, "Lead the way." Horst said nothing more and turned to the elevator not far away. Roan, Michelle and Potent Burn were sandwiched by other agents. Mona stayed at the door of the special investigation team, looking at Roan's back with worry in her eyes. Supervision department, interrogation room. Roan sat on a chair, without handcuffs on his hands, crossed his legs, and looked around with a curious look on his face. This interrogation room is much larger than that of ordinary investigation teams, and the decoration is also very good. There are more surveillance cameras in all directions. The current time is 2005, but Roan is actually here, and he feels the level of development in the future 15 or even 20 years. Roan is the only one in the interrogation room at this time. Next to the interrogation room is the monitoring room, and Potent Burn and Michelle can only stay here. At this time, Potent Burn looked ugly, pointing at Horst and shouting angrily, %*, motherfucker, how do you do things? Why do you think Roan Greenwood is the murderer of Pearson? Potent Burn felt that he was about to die of anger, and at the same time, his heart was cold. Years of experience and intrigue between life and death made him seriously suspect that Roan was tricked, and Roan was investigating the murder of team leader Roan at this time. Potent Burn was awed in his heart. He was a little unsure whether he was safe. His heart was full of thoughts. While cursing, he began to silently calculate the follow-up. Michelle next to him looked at Roan and said nothing. After so many days of communication, Michelle felt that, although Roan was a little narrow-minded, a little fond of money, a little narcissistic, and a little liked to bully Lassie when he had nothing to do, and a lot of other shortcomings. In addition to these, Roan was still very serious most of the time, and it was impossible for him to be the murderer of Pearson. But he was in a low position, and had no evidence. Apart from praying silently, all Michelle could do was to wait for the person who was interrogating Roan to prevent him from doing something that was not in accordance with the regulations. Horst ignored Potent Burn and waited for a while. A female agent brought a cup of Oriental tea. He took the cup of tea and left the monitoring room with an agent and walked into the interrogation room. "Good afternoon, Deputy Captain Greenwood." Placing the tea on the table in front of Luo An, Horst sat on the chair opposite him and said, "Since you already know why we called you here today, can you explain what the gun is about?" Luo An picked up the cup of tea and smelled it, but didn't drink it. He looked at Horst in front of him for a few seconds, and then suddenly smiled, turned to look at the male agent who came in with Horst, and asked, "What's your name?" The male agent was slightly stunned and replied, "My name is Yurik." "Yurik, a good name." Luo An smiled and nodded, then straightened his suit, leaned back tactically, and replied, "I believe you must have checked the case file of the William Mars gang, and I have written about the two guns in it. If you haven't checked it, go check it now." The gun that the inspection team mentioned was the weapon of one of the gunmen who was killed by Luo An in the previous operation at the direct reading factory. After the investigation, it was found that the gunman had committed several crimes and had 3 guns as his weapons. However, Roan only encountered 2 of them during the factory operation. We did check the case file. Horst took out a photo of the bullet found in Pearson's head, put it in front of Roan, and asked, "According to the description in the file, there was no one else around when you killed the gunman. Hey, you are going too far." Roan spread his hands. "When I killed the gunman, the team leader Potent Burn was behind me, and the distance between us was less than 2 meters. If I stole a gun, Potent Burn would not have been able to see it. In addition, handling a case is about evidence. From the time you appeared in front of me to now talking to me, I have not seen you have any valid evidence in your hands." "Of course we have evidence." Horst heard Roan's words and looked at Yurik beside him. Yurik immediately turned the screen of the computer he brought and showed the video inside to Roan. There are 2 videos. The first one is the night when Pearson was killed. The surveillance camera of the neighbor across from Pearson's house captured a guy wearing black clothes and black pants, whose face could not be seen, sneaking into Pearson's house. The second video is a surveillance camera in a corner of the street behind the apartment where Roan and Mona rented. It captured the scene of the man in black walking into the building where Roan lived without being seen. The height, figure, and body shape of the man in black are very similar to Roan, and the other party is wearing a pair of the same sneakers that Roan has. After watching these two surveillance videos, Roan raised his eyebrows slightly. He was very sure that he was definitely not the murderer of Pearson, and at this time in the video, Mona had not found Pearson. Dung. Just as Roan was thinking, there was a knock on the door of the interrogation room. Chapter 312 Search Warrant and Luo An's Discovery. A sudden knock on the door interrupted Roan's thoughts. Horst stood up and walked to the door of the interrogation room, whispered a few words to the visitor, took a piece of paper, and walked back to Roan. This is a search warrant issued by the court. Placing the black and red paper in front of Roan, Horst said seriously, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, if you are really not the murderer of Pearson, then please accept the search warrant, and don't make it difficult for us. Seeing the thin paper in front of him, that he usually handed to others, Roan's mind turned rapidly, and he soon figured out the logic behind the whole incident. Ha ha ha. Luo An clapped his hands and laughed. Awesome. So awesome. Horst looked at Luo An, who was laughing silently without saying anything, but Yurik on the side couldn't sit still and said sternly, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, if you still think you are an FBI, please cooperate with our work. Don't use such words to pressure me. Hearing Yurik's words, the smile on Luo An's face disappeared instantly. His eyes were full of coldness, and he said coldly, listen, as the deputy team leader of the special investigation team of the FBI Los Angeles branch, I will not refuse the search warrant issued by the court. But I also have a request, that is, before your supervisory department agents enter my house to search, they must let my agents check each of their clothes and pockets. I don't want to be searched in my own home and find things that I haven't seen myself. Horst's expression did not change when he heard this, but Yurik's face flushed instantly. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, you, Michelle. Luo An didn't give the other party a chance to speak, but shouted directly, I remember that according to FBI regulations, management personnel can make such requests. If I remember correctly, just hit the glass 3 times. The air in the interrogation room was quiet for a few seconds, and then there was a knock on the side glass. Bang, 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 exactly 3 times. According to Article 7 of Case 14, management personnel can request the investigation team to temporarily select agents from a third-party team to search their own space. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood's request is not excessive. Horst nodded with a business-like expression, then glanced at Yurik next to him. Go back and copy the FBI internal regulations 10 times and give them to me when you're done. Yes, sir. Luo An grinned and grabbed the search warrant on the table. Let's go, everyone. Where are we going first? The house I rented, or my special investigation team? Horst selectively ignored Luo An's sarcasm and even opened the door of the interrogation room for Luo An. The special investigation team is in the building. Let's go there first. In the corridor outside the special investigation team's office area, Luo An stood by with his arms folded, holding a search warrant. Mona was responsible for searching the pockets of the female agent from the supervision department, and Michelle searched the other male agents. Roan had intended to ask the team leader Potent Burn to help search the male agents, but when he saw Potent Burn's wide eyes, he didn't dare to ask him to help. Soon, 8 inspectors from the supervision department, 5 men and 3 women, finished the search. Roan nodded, and Horst waved his hand, and sent them into the office area of the special investigation team. Roan and his friends had not been in Los Angeles for long, and they had not handled many cases, so the office area was quickly checked. The team leader's office was even simpler. Roan rarely worked there on weekdays. Most of the time, he sat in the office area outside with Mona and the others, so it was very clean and there was nothing inside. In less than half an hour, the 8 agents walked out of the special investigation team office area with empty hands. Seeing the leading agent shaking his head at Horst and Mona's unfriendly eyes, Roan said coldly, "Next time you go to search my rented house, be clean and put everything back in place. Otherwise, watch your attitude, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." Horst glanced at Roan. "You threatened my agents verbally. I will remember this." Roan grinned. "Then after this matter is over today, I will make you remember me for the rest of your life." Outside the apartment rented by Roan and Mona. Because Mona also lives here, Michelle is responsible for checking the female agents of the supervision department, and the work of checking the male agents is given to the team leader Potent Burn. Seeing the other party glaring at him, Roan shook the search warrant in his hand with an innocent face. "Don't blame me. He is the only man in the special investigation team. Blame Horst if you want to." Seeing Potent Burn start to glare at him, Horst remained silent. The two quickly checked the 3 women and 5 men, then opened the door and walked into the apartment rented by Luo An and Mona. One of the male agents quickly found the same sneakers as the man in black. Horst waved his hand to signal his men to install them. Seeing this, Luo An patted Mona's arm and added, "Mona, you will go to the trace inspection department with them later. Don't let someone swap the dirt on the bottom of my sneakers." Horst glanced at Luo An and said nothing. Some agents from the supervision department next to him were almost furious at Luo An's sarcastic words. Time passed by minute. The apartment rented by Luo An and Mona was not small, with several rooms. In addition, there were a lot of things in Mona's bedroom, so the 8 agents searched for nearly 3 hours before they finished the inspection. A male agent came out. "Sir, no weapon suspected of killing Agent Pearson was found." After a few minutes, a female agent also came out. "Report to the commander. We didn't find anything unusual." Horst was silent and frowned when he heard this. Yukri behind him stepped forward and asked in a serious tone, "Didn't you find any clues?" Without waiting for the 8 agents to answer, Roan, who was standing aside, yawned and said with a smile, "It seems that Mr. Yukri is very skeptical about the workability of your colleagues. How about you go in and search again?" As soon as Roan finished speaking, the 8 agents who searched the room looked at Yukri with unfriendly faces. Yukri's face turned green when he saw this. "That's not what I meant. You." "Okay." Horst suddenly spoke, interrupted Yukri loudly, looked at Roan intently for a few times, and said seriously, "I'm sorry for today, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. If there is any progress later, I will contact you again." After saying that, Horst waved his hand and was ready to take his agents away from here, but Roan suddenly jumped out and blocked them firmly in front of him. "Captain Horst, you have been tossing me for so long today. It is not appropriate to leave now. What do you want? The Pearson murder case is a case of our special investigation team." Roan sneered. "Give us the video in front." Horst did not refuse, but he also had his own requirements. "We need to keep the original. We can only give you a copy." "Okay." Seeing Roan nodded in agreement, Horst breathed a sigh of relief, and just as he was about to move forward, he found that Roan was still blocking the way. "Deputy Captain Greenwood, what else do you want?" Roan raised his arm and grinned. "I want him." Following the instructions, everyone found that Roan's target was actually Yukri behind Horst. Seeing Yukri with a tense face and at a loss, Roan sneered in his heart. Just like what he said when he laughed before, Roan finally figured out the logic behind this matter. There will be 3 updates today and 3 updates tomorrow. Thank you for your support. Open bracket close bracket. Chapter 313 The Mastermind's plan to frame Luo An. Outside the apartment rented by Luo An and Mona, everyone looked at Luo An and Yurik, who was pointed at by Luo An in confusion. Luo An ignored everyone's doubts. He had already figured out the role of the supervision department in this matter, a toolman. Luo An was very sure that the people in the 2 videos he had seen before were definitely not himself. When the supervision department took the search warrant and searched Luo An's rented apartment, his pair of sneakers, the same style as the men in black, would definitely be sent to the trace inspection department to test the composition of the mud on the soles. Luo An had never worn those shoes to Pearson's house, and when he and Mona checked the house before, he did not find that his shoes had been touched. Therefore, the mud on the soles of those sneakers and the mud test results of Pearson's house would definitely not be the same. The real purpose of the mastermind behind the scenes was not the sneakers, but to use the 2 videos to reasonably apply for a search warrant from the court to search Luo An's home. Don't forget, there was an overseas account in the bathroom of Luo An's rented apartment before. If the inspection department found the overseas account book, then the following things would be interesting. The soil composition of the soles of Deputy Team Leader Owen Greenwood's sports shoes is indeed different from the soil composition details of Pearson's home. Our inspection department can temporarily exclude his suspicion of killing Pearson, but we found some overseas accounts with funds of $700,000 in Deputy Team Leader Owen Greenwood's home that he could not explain. There is a lot of money in those accounts, and they are all washed very clean. The inspection department can arrest Owen Greenwood for interrogation on some financial charges such as huge amounts of property from unknown sources. As long as Roan is detained by the inspection department, everything will be easier in the future. The mastermind behind the scenes has a way to send Roan to prison for a few years. After all, the IS group likes to intervene in matters related to money, and Roan has no way to prove that those accounts have nothing to do with him. The customs in American prisons are well known. As an FBI law enforcement officer, Roan will definitely be targeted when he enters, and it is also likely that he will be shot in the back and commit suicide. During Luo An's detention, the other people in the special investigation team will most likely be at a loss, and it will be easier for the mastermind to erase their information about the investigation of the murder of team leader Owen. At that time, some evidence will suddenly disappear for some reason. The investigation team that took over the murder of team leader Owen from the special investigation team will definitely have a much greater difficulty in handling the case, and the mastermind can basically rest easy. The whole plan is smooth, and one link after another. After Luo An figured it out, he wanted to applaud the mastermind. Using political means, they can easily and reasonably send people to prison. They have so much experience in this regard, which is worthy of the federal style of freedom and democracy. Luo An, who figured it out, sneered in his heart. Thanks to his killer ability and means in his previous life, he discovered the overseas account in advance. Otherwise he would definitely be in a very passive situation now. As for where the overseas account is now, after discovering the overseas account last night, Luo An asked Mona to create a program using the internet. After 24 hours, the program will launder the money in the overseas account to an account in Africa that only Luo An and Mona know. There is no reason to refuse the gift sent by the enemy. The sugar coating can be kept, and the shell can be thrown back. It is a waste to refuse $700,000. The reason why the computer program is set to 24 hours is that Luo An inferred that the mastermind behind the scenes will definitely attack him within this time. The other party must have investigated Luo An. With his ability, in another 24 hours, he will definitely find more clues related to the mastermind. I'm sorry, Deputy Chief Greenwood. Horst pressed down Roan's arm and refused. You didn't. I did. Before Horst finished speaking, Roan interrupted him and said bluntly, you inexplicably interfered with my special investigation team's case today, and said that I was the murderer, locked me in the interrogation room, and searched my home. I now suspect that this Yakri is the murderer of Pearson. He did this to frame me. So, as the deputy chief of the special investigation team, I now ask him to cooperate with our investigation for 24 hours. Is there a problem? XN hearing Roan's undisguised statement that he was just taking revenge, Mona and Michelle looked at each other in silence. Potent Burn was stunned for a moment, and then laughed, hugging his arms, and looking at Horst so funny. The agents of the supervision department were almost vomiting blood in anger. Horst, whose expression had not changed much, subconsciously twitched the corners of his mouth when he heard this. Seeing that Roan was so determined, and that he would not let them leave unless they agreed, Horst pondered for a few seconds and patted Yurik on the shoulder. Cooperate with Deputy Chief Greenwood's investigation. I believe that the special investigation team will not do anything that violates FBI regulations. Horst said the latter sentence while looking at Roan. Roan grinned and did not refute. He turned around and made way for Horst and his men to leave. Horst patted Yurik on the shoulder and led his men away. He could see that Roan was a man of rules and was not worried that Roan would torture Yurik. It was nothing more than torturing Yurik for a while to vent his anger. Horst was not in a hurry. It happened that Yurik's recent work behavior and attitude made him dissatisfied. Letting Roan hone Yurik would also be good for his future growth. Yurik, abandoned by his superiors and colleagues. Hehe. After Horst and others had all left, Luo An stepped forward, patted Yurik's shoulder, who was frightened and almost green-faced, without giving him a chance to speak, and said directly, "Michelle, take our suspect back to the 5th investigation team. I will interrogate him in person later." "No problem." Michelle nodded, took out a pair of handcuffs from his waist, walked in front of Yurik, and asked, "Walk by yourself? Or do you want me to take you with me?" Yurik smiled bitterly, turned around and walked towards the exit with Michelle. Team leader Potent Burn chuckled. "Luo An, be careful." "Okay, sir, I will never make it difficult for you." "Good." Hearing Luo An's assurance, Potent Burn nodded with satisfaction and added, "I will report this matter to the director later. The supervision department has gone too far this time." Luo An smiled. "Thank you, sir." Potent Burn waved his hand and said nothing more, and also turned around and left here. When Potent Burn gradually disappeared from his sight, the smile on Roan's face slowly disappeared. After a few seconds of hesitation, he turned to Mona beside him and whispered, "Mona, go to the trace examination department and pay attention to the sneakers. Don't let anyone tamper with them." "Okay." Mona nodded and agreed. Her mood fluctuated greatly, and she raised the corners of her mouth slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Roan continued to whisper in her ear, "In addition, take away Yurik's mobile phone after returning. Carefully check this guy's interpersonal relationships, call records, and specific whereabouts of the past 2 days." Huh. Mona's expression moved. Seeing the flashing light in Roan's eyes, she immediately realized something, nodded vigorously, hugged Roan, turned around and ran quickly to the exit. The place that was bustling just now finally became quiet. Roan saw everyone leave through the window. He hesitated for a while, took out his mobile phone, and called Lassie. "It's me, Roan. How are you doing?" Chapter 314 Clues found by Lassie. Fouquet. After Luo An finished speaking, Lassie on the other end of the phone uttered several interjections in a row, and then asked with excitement and shock on her face, "Luo An, you are amazing. How did you guess that they are really here?" Hearing Lassie say that she really found something, Luo An was slightly relieved and explained with a smile, "I guessed. I just used a little process of elimination." "You are so damn smart." Lassie on the other end of the phone praised Luo An crazily after hearing this. Luo An smiled and motioned Lassie to say more and not stop. Lassie, who was holding the phone, rolled her eyes when she heard this, looked at the thing in her hand, and asked, "This is a hard drive. What should I do next?" "Go buy a laptop, import the things into the computer, and then put the computer in a store in South Los Angeles." Luo An pondered for a while, said the name of a store, and said that he would be there in an hour, and finally added, "After that, you take the hard drive to a hidden place to rest for a while. Except for me, don't answer anyone who contacts you, okay?" "No problem." For Lassie, who came from the intelligence department, disguising her identity and hiding are her basic skills, so she agreed without hesitation. After hanging up the phone, Luo An sat down on the sofa in the living room with his eyes closed, thinking silently about what to do next. It is no exaggeration to say that the murder of team leader Roan is the most difficult case that Luo An considers since he came to this world. In the past, if the case could not be solved, Luo An still had a way out of throwing the case to other people. But in this case, the other party dared to send someone to kill the leader of the investigation team, could reasonably use the FBI's supervision department, and could also send someone to hide the stolen goods in his own home. Interesting, really interesting. After thinking for a while, Luo An grinned, stood up and walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, took out several large steaks and started cooking. The first wave of the mastermind's operation to frame him was blocked, but as time went on, it was not ruled out that the mastermind would be desperate and overturn the table and directly send someone to attack him. Facing the possible war that might come next, Luo An decided to fill his stomach first. There were still a few bottles of physical potion, but they needed to be kept for the time being. Luo An didn't know what would happen next. After more than 40 minutes, after cooking the steak, Luo An ate 3 pieces himself, brought 1 piece each to Mona and Michelle as dinner, then walked out of the apartment and drove away. Halfway, Luo An parked the car next to a large shopping mall and got out and went inside. Using his killer skills and his previous experience here, Luo An changed his clothes and hid in a corner. He found 2 inspectors who were following him. He sneered and left from another way to go to the store he told Lassie before. After picking up the computer at the agreed location, Luo An did not return to the large shopping mall. Instead, he walked around to a street and checked again to confirm that no one was following him. Finally, he stopped a taxi and went to the FBI Los Angeles building. In the large shopping mall in the distance, 2 inspectors were still struggling to find and wait for Luo An. Special Investigation Team, Office Area, 5:30 p.m. I brought you steaks. Luo An, who had changed into a suit again, pushed the door open and handed 2 steaks to Mona and Michelle respectively. Then he smiled at Michelle. I made it myself. See how it tastes? Thank you. Michelle took the steak, opened the box, and smelled the fragrant aroma. She looked up and said in surprise, I didn't expect that team leader Luo An can cook, and his cooking skills are so good. It's a small matter. As long as you are used to it, I have incorporated some oriental cooking methods. Luo An smiled and picked up the teacup on the table to drink. Mona, who was next to him, handed over a folder while eating steak and mumbled, the report from the trace examination department is out. They said that your sneakers have not been to the land near the Pearson family. Yeah. Luo An took the folder without looking at it. It was expected. Michelle took a bite of the steak. The traditional, novel and delicious taste made her raise her eyebrows. She swallowed the steak in her mouth and asked, that Yurik is in the interrogation room now. Are you going to interrogate him later? Not for now, just lock him up. Luo An waved his hand and refused the suggestion of interrogating him and providing him with dinner. He would not starve to death if he didn't eat a meal. Then he took Mona and Michelle into the team leader's office, handed the laptop he brought to Mona, and said seriously, this is the clue I asked Lassie to find. Please organize it. Mona was slightly stunned after taking the laptop. After seeing the content inside, her pupils shrank. These are the cases investigated by team leader Rowan and Pearson, and the clues they organized about the case. Where did you ask Lassie to find them? Not only Mona was shocked, but Michelle also looked at Luo An with surprise on her face, and even forgot to continue chewing the steak in her mouth. In a place we overlooked, Luo An made himself a cup of fresh tea, and showed the 2 a calm smile. As mentioned before, team leader Owen, who is so meticulous, would definitely hide the clues of his secret investigation of the case. But there is no clue at home, no clue at the office, and team leader Rowan has no other women outside, and he has never opened the safe at the bank. Luo An thought about it, and thought of a place that they had found before, but had forgotten about, the car whose front windshield was shot, and team leader Rowan paid for the repairs. What? In the car? Hearing Luo An's words, Mona and Michelle were shocked at first, and then they all reacted, and slapped their heads. Yes, the car is indeed the safest place. The mastermind behind the scenes would not think of this, because they sent people to shoot at the car, to warn team leader Owen. The investigation team that came to investigate team leader Owen's life experience would also ignore the car, because they would only pay attention to the fact that team leader Owen was threatened with shooting before his death. Team leader Owen is indeed an old man who has worked in the FBI for more than 10 years. Mona and Michelle were very moved by this, and then they looked at Rowan with eyes full of admiration. Lassie, thank you for your hard work on this matter. Rowan waved his hand. Lassie had put a lot of effort into this matter. Because Lassie had to sneak into the car without disturbing or attracting the attention of the logistics department, the second investigation team, and other passers-by agents, and look for a document whose specific appearance was unknown. This was a very laborious and difficult task. Knowing that Rowan asked Lassie to take the original clue and hide it temporarily, Mona and Michelle did not say anything. This was indeed the most suitable for the current situation. Open the folder and take a look. Rowan shook the teacup in his hand and raised his chin towards the laptop. Mona stopped talking nonsense and began to type quickly on the keyboard with 10 fingers. Soon, a line of text appeared in front of the three people, which made Mona and Michelle's faces instantly become extremely ugly, and Rowan showed an expression of sudden enlightenment. Chapter 315, $30 million, $9 million, too dark. At the top of the computer screen document, there was a line of text, FBI agents and SWAT team members Injury and Disability Retirement Security Fund. The specific purpose of this fund was clearly written in the text. This place is located in Los Angeles, and many wealthy people and celebrities want to have a good relationship with the FBI, so they often donate to the FBI and LAPD in Los Angeles. The FBI also allocates a sum of money here every year. After years of accumulation and investment, the money in this fund has reached nearly $30 million US. Team leader Rowan stated in the document that there was a problem with the account of this fund. According to his and Pearson's investigation, some guy stole nearly $9 million US from this fund. Wow. Seeing these words, Luo An's eyes flashed with enlightenment, and he finally understood why the mastermind behind the scenes wanted to kill team leader Rowan and Pearson. To silence them, $9 million US is a big number worth taking risks for most federal people. Shit. Son of. Mona and Michelle, who had reacted, cursed in a low voice. All agents on the front line could enjoy benefits from this fund, and the money could definitely save their lives at a critical moment. After all, they knew the details of the federal government's free medical care. Now the money that could save their lives was stolen by some people. How could they not be angry? Calm down. Calm down. Mr. Luo An, who had 3 small goals, patted the shoulders of the two and signaled Mona to continue to check the contents of the computer. The most urgent thing was to see where team leader Rowan had investigated and which suspects he had found. Okay. Mona took a deep breath and continued to type on the keyboard. According to team leader Rowan's information, this case was first discovered by a frontline SWAT team member, but he was silenced before he reported the matter. When Pearson was working in the criminal justice department, he learned about this by chance from a criminal. Just as he was about to conduct a detailed investigation, the criminal hanged himself in prison because he felt that he was guilty. From then on, Pearson began to investigate secretly. After a long period of observation, he was sure that team leader Rowan didn't know about this matter, so he pulled team leader Rowan into the group. With the help of team leader Rowan, an experienced team leader, the two of them made rapid progress in the investigation and soon found a reliable informant who knew a lot of inside information. Then the informant disappeared after get off work one day. This incident shocked team leader Rowan and Pearson, and they hurriedly suspended the investigation for a while and only started to take action half a month later. At this time, team leader Rowan and Pearson had locked on 10 targets. After all, it was not an easy thing to steal money from the foundation. It must have the participation of senior management and must be multi-party cooperation. That day, team leader Rowan drove to the dock to discuss with Pearson who to start the investigation next. Then team leader Rowan was shot, and Pearson left this world with him not long after. It's dark. It's really dark. After reading the information, Luo An shook his head repeatedly, while Mona and Michelle looked very ugly. Because among the 10 suspects listed by team leader Rowan, there is not only the financial director in charge of the fund, but also the deputy director of the FBI Los Angeles branch, a senior executive of the supervision department, a senior executive of the criminal justice department, and a senior executive of the SWAT team. Gulp. Mona swallowed her saliva, turned back to look at Luo An, and said in a bad tone, Luo An, who should we investigate next? Most of the 10 suspects have higher status and level than the people in their special investigation team. Don't worry about these people for now. Seeing that Mona and Michelle looked embarrassed, Luo An reached out and patted their shoulders, showing a smile that made them feel at ease, and asked, Mona, I asked you to investigate Yurik in the interrogation room before. How is your investigation going? Yurik? Mona was slightly stunned, took the laptop handed to her by Michelle, and asked while typing, I don't quite understand why you want to investigate him. Because my intuition tells me that there is something wrong with him. After making a casual rebuttal to Mona, Luo An got a pair of sanitary balls. Luo An didn't care. He didn't lie to Mona. He really felt that Yurik had a problem. But the reason was not intuition. but the emotional perception in his mind. When Horst led the inspectors to the special investigation team, Luo An turned on the emotional perception in his mind. He didn't turn off the emotional perception until they searched the rental apartment and left. During this period, Horst gave Luo An a constant cold feeling. The other detectives felt similar. Only when Luo An provoked them, their attitude would be colder. But Yurik was different. As soon as Luo An turned on the emotional perception, the stinging disgust came over him. Luo An, who had some guesses, kept testing Yurik. When Luo An said that the inspectors had no evidence, Yurik was very proud of the video. Luo An clapped his hands and laughed, and Yurik felt even more disgusted. Luo An proposed to investigate the other party before allowing the search. Yurik was stunned at first, and then his face was very dissatisfied, but he was very proud in his heart. When his colleagues searched Rone's apartment, Yurik was very calm and even a little happy. When his colleagues found nothing, Yurik was first extremely shocked, and then an indescribable fear. After many attempts, Rone was 100% sure that Yurik knew about the overseas accounts. Of course, Yurik did not necessarily know about the overseas accounts themselves, because his technical ability was average, and he could not sneak into the apartment secretly. Rone was referring to the mastermind behind the scenes. He probably told Yurik that there was evidence in the apartment that could nail Rone, but the other party did not tell Yurik what the evidence itself was. Afterwards, when Rone asked Horst for the two surveillance videos, he deliberately observed the expressions of everyone. The other agents of the supervision department all subconsciously glanced at Yurik, and Yurik pursed his lips slightly. These show that the two surveillance videos were probably given to Horst by Yurik. Through these situations, Rone judged that Yurik should be the toolman who withdrew from the mastermind. After all, the mastermind status is relatively high, and it is impossible for him to do everything himself. I checked Yurik's phone and call records. Mona typed on the computer keyboard for a while and shrugged, but I didn't find anything unusual. Luo An was not panicked, and continued to ask, what was his itinerary in the past 48 hours? The mastermind behind the scenes wanted to frame Luo An, so he had to give the surveillance video to Yurik, so the other party had to meet. The surveillance video was no more than 48 hours old, so the time when Yurik and the other party met was definitely within these 48 hours. Sorry, I haven't found anything unusual yet. Mona frowned slightly and played all the surveillance footage she found to Luo An, including Yurik leaving home, driving to work, buying coffee and eating breakfast, working, etc. Suddenly, Luo An pointed to a surveillance video and shouted, "Stop." Mona quickly stopped playing the video. This was the scene of Yurik going to the parking lot alone after get off work last night. Rone pointed to the lower left corner of the surveillance screen and said in a deep voice, "There is a person here, zoom in." Mona quickly zoomed in and soon saw the man's face. It was Hunter Anderson, the captain of the SWAT team. Looking at this middle-aged white man who was about the same height and build as Rone, Mona and Michelle frowned, and Rone also crossed his arms over his chest and fell silent. Chapter 316. Suspect. Prepare in advance. Go to the other party's house. Special Investigation Team, office area. The middle-aged white man who appeared in the computer was named Lawrence. He was the SWAT captain who stood with Pot and Burn and answered his questions during the previous separatist factory operation. Lawrence had worked in SWAT for nearly 10 years and was experienced and capable. His colleagues had a very good impression of him and commented that he was a helpful and reliable teammate. After a moment of silence, Luo An said, "Mona, check the two guys who were good at making booby traps and mechanical structures before, and see if they have any connection with Lawrence." "Okay." Mona nodded, and just as she was about to investigate the case, Michelle next to her said, "No need." Luo An and Mona both stopped and looked at her. Michelle walked out of the team leader's office quickly, and then quickly came back and handed Luo An a folder. "After I came back from the trace examination department, I carefully checked the two suspects who could make mechanical structures. The suspect in prison has no connection with Lawrence, but the guy who died in a car accident 2 years ago, the last time he committed a crime before his death, Lawrence and his men arrested him. The folder handed over by Michelle showed that the suspect was making a mechanical structure and preparing to commit a crime, and then he was blocked at home by Lawrence and SWAT team members. Afterwards, the mechanical structure was taken away by SWAT for a short time and then handed over to the trace examination department later. Roan, I found something. At this moment, Mona suddenly called Roan and Michelle over. She pointed at the computer and said, on the night when team leader Owen was killed, the internal SWAT action records showed that Lawrence and one of his men went out to perform a certain mission. The content of the mission is confidential, so I can't find out, but the time of the mission execution is not much different from the time of team leader Rowan's death. In addition, Mona tapped the keyboard with 10 fingers and called up a consumption record. A team member and Lawrence once bought a pair of sneakers of the same style as yours. This means that the man in black who appeared in the surveillance is most likely Lawrence. This Lawrence is agile, and the one who sneaked into Roan's house to give him a gift before might also be him. TSK. Throwing the folder aside, Roan smacked his lips and laughed, using an experienced SWAT captain to frame me as really a big deal. But Roan thought about it and thought it was a good thing. The other party used the SWAT captain to personally carry out the mission, which means that the captain's level of people are more trusted by the mastermind. Lawrence must have had face-to-face contact with the mastermind. It is impossible for too many people to be involved in stealing money from the fund. The other party can contact Lawrence, and the circle of suspects has been narrowed down a lot. This is also the reason why Luo An was not in a hurry to start the investigation from the 10 senior executives. The senior executives will never do it themselves. They have more time to deal with the details of their own affairs and strive to be foolproof and without loopholes. It is undoubtedly very difficult to find a breakthrough from them. It is definitely easier to find clues from the people at the bottom who actually execute orders than those at the top. The only difficulty is how to make these people who execute orders at the bottom confess, or how to use clues to closely connect these people at the bottom with the top executives. How to do this? Luo An is not in a hurry. He has thought of some ways. Luo An cannot determine which of the senior executives in the Los Angeles branch has problems and which does not, and he cannot trust the people sent for the time being. The Washington headquarters is far away, but Luo An has contacted Vereen's and has made some preparations for the follow-up. Looking up at the clock not far away, it was already 6:15 p.m. Luo An no longer hesitated and said, Michelle, you and Mona will stay with the special investigation team. Apart from my order, you must not agree to anyone who asks you to leave the office area or wants to enter the office area. Do you understand? Understood. Michelle agreed decisively, and Mona frowned, realizing some problems. Luo An, are you going to go out alone next? Yes. Luo An nodded. He had a system and potions. Even if he met an enemy, he was confident that he could defeat the enemy or escape. But if he brought others with him, this 10-point confidence would probably be 20 to 80. He was. The other party was 80. But Mona was still very worried. When she was about to say something, Roan walked up to her and whispered, Mona, believe me. In addition, you must stay in the special investigation team this time. I need your help with some things. Hearing Roan's words whispering in her ear, Mona was stunned at first, and then nodded thoughtfully, no problem, leave it to me. Half an hour later, everything was ready. Roan called Lassie to make sure that the other party was hiding well. After a few simple explanations, he walked into the equipment warehouse and left the special investigation team. Driving the SUV out of the FBI Los Angeles branch building and circling the road a few times, Roan saw the familiar car through the rearview mirror and grinned. He stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the SUV rushed forward like lightning. Captain Lawrence's home is in West Los Angeles. Roan parked the SUV on the side of the road, briefly checked the equipment, walked to the front of the apartment, and knocked on the door. Soon, a middle-aged white man with brown pupils and a hooked nose, who was about the same height as Roan, opened the door. Good evening. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. Seeing Roan, Lawrence's eyes flashed with a barely perceptible coldness, but his face showed a warm smile. He extended his hand to Roan and asked, what can I do for you? Roan extended his hand and shook hands with him, smiling. "I have a small question and want to ask you for some clues. Can I come in and talk?" Lawrence quickly turned sideways and extended his hand to the room. "Of course. Please come in." "Thank you." Roan walked into the apartment with a smile on his face. Lawrence behind him reached out to close the door and locked it without making a sound. Lawrence's home is the most common two-story apartment on the market in Los Angeles. There is a small living room, kitchen and other rooms on the first floor. When Roan walked into the living room, he saw someone who surprised him a little: Hunter Anderson. Seeing Roan, Hunter quickly got up from the sofa and stretched out his hand to him. "Good evening, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." "Good evening." Roan glanced at the wine glass on the table, smiled and shook hands with the other party, and then asked casually, "Why are you here? Are you communicating with Captain Lawrence? Am I here at the wrong time?" "Don't joke, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. We only like women. Hunter came to my house because he had some small problems at work and didn't know what to do, so he asked me to chat." Lawrence walked over at this time, explained with a smile, then picked up the wine glass and poured a glass of wine for Roan. "I don't know what question Deputy Team Leader Greenwood wants to ask me tonight. As long as I know, I will definitely not hide it. Don't be too formal, just call me Roan." Roan took the wine glass with a smile, clinked it with Lawrence and Hunter, and then sat down on the sofa. "Since Captain Lawrence said so, I won't say any more nonsense. I would like to ask, Captain Lawrence, what did you feel when you shot and killed Team Leader Owen?" As soon as the words fell, the air in the living room suddenly became quiet. Chapter 317. Luo An. "These are the people I'm waiting for." As Roan spoke, Lawrence's expression remained unchanged, but a barely perceptible cold light flashed through his eyes. Hunter's hand holding the wine glass trembled slightly, and his eyes subconsciously glanced at Lawrence. Seeing Hunter's actions and the emotional perception that Hunter was neither cold nor indifferent to him, but had an undisguised cold and hostile feeling towards Lawrence, Roan's mouth twitched slightly, as if he had gained something unexpected. "But Hunter is not important now. Lawrence is the key." "Sorry, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." The air in the living room was quiet for a few seconds, and Lawrence put down the wine glass and shook his head. "I can't hear. Rooney Jean." Without waiting for Lawrence to finish his words, Roan called out the name of one of the 10 suspects that Team Leader Rowan had investigated before. Seeing that Lawrence was only slightly stunned, and there was no other change, Roan kept talking, staring at the other's face, and quickly called out the names of the other 9 suspects. When the name of a senior official named Hernandez in the Criminal Justice Department was called, Lawrence's face moved slightly, and Luo An suddenly smiled. "So the person above you is him." Hernandez is a senior official in the Criminal Justice Department of the FBI Los Angeles branch, responsible for financial crimes. His status and rank are higher than Pearson, but they are not in the same office. However, there is definitely more than one person behind the scenes, and the other party's power and ability are not that great. Seeing Luo An clapping his hands and laughing, the expression on Lawrence's face became completely gloomy, and he pointed to the door of the apartment not far away and said, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, if you are here to cause trouble tonight, the door is over there. Also, please provide evidence when you speak. If you continue to frame me, I will appeal to the supervision department and sue you for this matter." "Don't be so angry, Captain Lawrence. Calm yourself down." Luo An laughed, picked up the wine on the table, and poured it into Lawrence's glass, and said casually, "Of course I have evidence. You don't know, when I first moved into that apartment, I installed a small surveillance camera in the eyes of the teddy bear in the corner of the living room." Hearing this and seeing Luo An's leisurely expression, Lawrence's pupils shrank, and he glanced at Hunter who was sitting on the sofa next to him. Without hesitation, he gritted his teeth, and immediately took out a pistol from behind, and aimed at Luo An. Roan, who seemed to be relaxed, but actually had tense muscles, was faster than Lawrence. The moment Lawrence reached behind him, he picked up the wine that had just been poured on the table, and threw it hard at Lawrence's face. Bang! The next second, a gunshot rang out, but because of the wine on his face, Lawrence's pistol was forced to miss, and the bullet hit the wall not far away. After the wine in the glass was finished, Roan threw the glass at Lawrence's face, clenched his right fist, and hit Lawrence's chest hard. Bang! A muffled sound came from Lawrence's chest, and the terrifying force made Lawrence's pupils shrink, and he fell backwards on the sofa uncontrollably. Roan took advantage of the situation to take away the opponent's pistol, took out handcuffs, and handcuffed Lawrence's hands, and used his knees to firmly press against the opponent's thighs, completely controlling the opponent. Shit. Roan's series of actions were so fast that Lawrence, whose face was still dripping with wine, just reacted and found that he was controlled. His face flushed, and his eyes bulged. Hunter Anderson, who was standing next to him, also reacted at this time. He quickly stood up, and took out his pistol, and aimed at Roan. Don't move. Click. The moment Hunter stood up, Roan also took out a pistol from his back with his other hand, and then aimed at Hunter, while Hunter was aiming at himself, and said coldly without looking back, "Hunter Anderson, considering that you have just been transferred from the Weapons of Mass Destruction Bureau to the SWAT team not long ago, I will give you a chance. Put down the gun." "No." Hunter, who was shocked by Roan's agile skills, swallowed his saliva. He felt that he seemed to be unable to beat the other party, but still refused to put down his weapon in his hand, and said seriously, "Let go of my captain first." Hehe. Lawrence, who was controlled by Roan, sneered at this. Just as he was about to speak, Roan slapped him hard in the face. Bang. "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Roan held Lawrence down firmly, turned to look at Hunter, and briefly described to him the murder of team leader Rowan and the general situation of the problem with the Foundation's funds. Finally, he said in a serious tone, "You just saw it too. It was Lawrence who pulled out the gun first. If he had no problem, would he do this?" After Roan finished his narration, Roan's mouth barely broke free from his control and immediately shouted to Hunter, "Framed. All framed. Listen, Hunter, Greenwood's words are all lies. You must." Before he finished speaking, Lawrence saw the pistol in Hunter's hand slowly move from Roan to his forehead. "Lawrence, I believe in Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." Hunter Anderson's face gradually turned cold, and he said sternly, "Do you still remember Clarence, my dear Captain Lawrence?" Hearing this name, Roan raised his eyebrows slightly, as if he had seen this name somewhere. Lawrence's face changed. "What is your relationship with him?" Hunter sneered. "He is my aunt's cousin." Luo An recalled an incident at this time. According to the information of team leader Owen, the problem with the fund was first discovered by a frontline SWAT team member, who was later silenced. Chapter 314. The name of the frontline SWAT team member who was silenced was Clarence. Hunter next to him said that it was because his cousin's cause of death was unknown, and his aunt passed away due to excessive grief. In order to avenge the two, Hunter chose to leave the Weapons of Mass Destruction Bureau, which was a more relaxed department, and join the SWAT team, a frontline department that walks on the boundary of life and death every day. When he came to the SWAT team, where his cousin was before his death, Hunter had been disguising himself as an ordinary team member, and secretly investigated the cause of his cousin's death. After so many days of investigation, Hunter has not found the specific cause of his cousin's death, but found that this matter is definitely related to Captain Lawrence. In order to find more clues, Hunter chose this time to take the initiative to build a good relationship with Lawrence, and brought some wine to Lawrence's house every few days. When Luo An first started talking about the two cases, Hunter was still wary, but when he heard that the time of death of the first line player was exactly the same as the time of death of his cousin, Hunter immediately confirmed the truth of Luo An's statement. After saying these things, Hunter looked at Luo An with red eyes. "Thank you, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." "You're welcome," Luo An replied casually. He finally understood what Hunter's undisguised dislike for Lawrence in his previous emotional perception was. "Son of." After listening to Hunter's narration, Lawrence cursed in a low voice, then closed his eyes and stopped talking. Seeing Lawrence's attitude, Hunter, who had confirmed the murderer, was about to physically interrogate him. Seeing this, Roan reached out to stop him and said, "Go search his bedroom and study. There may be clues we need in there." "Okay." Hunter took a few deep breaths, swallowed the anger in his heart, turned around and walked towards the study upstairs in the apartment. But before a few minutes had passed, Hunter ran down with an anxious face. "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, There are people outside the apartment. At this time, two cars were parked on the road outside the front and back doors of the apartment. A group of guys in suits and holding rifles began to slowly approach the front and back doors of the apartment. Unlike the anxious look on Hunter's face, Roan, who was holding Lawrence, saw the familiar cars through the glass and grinned. "It's okay, I'm waiting for these people." Hunter, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318. Hunter is ready to exchange his life. The enemy attacks. SWAT team. Outside the apartment, two cars were parked on the road at the front and back doors, with 4 people getting off each car. A total of 16 guys in suits, masks, and rifles slowly approached the apartment. Inside the apartment, Hunter Anderson, who only had a pistol in his hand, was sweating on his forehead when he saw so many enemies. He was sure that he could kill 1 or 2 enemies unexpectedly, but he was really powerless to do anything about the rest. Hunter, who had just learned part of the cause of his cousin's death, swallowed his saliva. After a little thought, a ruthless look flashed in his eyes. He planned to risk his life to contain the enemy for Roan and help Roan break out of the apartment and escape from here. Hunter has now seen that the murder of his cousin is just a small incident in the big case of the Foundation. Lawrence and others who attacked his cousin were just a knife. Hunter really hated the knife that killed people, but he hated the person holding the knife even more. That is, the mastermind who gave Lawrence and others the order to silence them. The mastermind behind this big case is definitely not low ranking. Hunter believes that as a grassroots team member, he is unlikely to be able to bring down the other party. Rather than letting himself and Deputy Team Leader Greenwood die here, it is better to fight and use his life to exchange for a chance for Deputy Team Leader Greenwood to break through. Hunter has heard about Roan's performance in the bank robbery case. He has always admired Roan and believes in Roan's skills, ability, and courage. Just now, Hunter heard Roan's description of the case and Roan's determination to find the murderer for Team Leader Owen. So he believes that Roan will never give up this case and will definitely find out the truth and avenge Team Leader Owen, himself, and his cousin. Roan didn't know Hunter Anderson's psychological activities. When he saw the enemy outside the apartment, he forcibly opened Captain Lawrence's eyes and asked in a serious voice, "Captain Lawrence, do you think these people are here to save you? Or are they here to silence you?" The answer to this question is obvious. Lawrence gritted his teeth and didn't answer, but his face trembled uncontrollably. Just as Hunter was about to tell Roan his thoughts, Roan grabbed Lawrence in front of his shocked gaze and hid in the corner of a room on the second floor of the apartment. No one wants to die. Only by living can there be a future, right? Ignoring the astonished look of Hunter who was following behind him, Roan grabbed Lawrence and asked, "Tell me the specific situation of the loss of Foundation funds. I can explain it to the judge and court." "Do you think you can leave here alive today?" Lawrence sneered. Hunter saw the enemy getting closer and closer outside the apartment and was anxious. Roan looked at Lawrence's face in silence for a second and suddenly grinned. "You are worried that, if you reveal the mastermind, you will die in prison. It is better to die today. Anyway, you have already left the seeds, right?" Lawrence frowned when he heard it. Just as he was about to speak, Roan took out his mobile phone and said in a false voice, where Lawrence could not see the screen, "Lassie, if I die tonight, I will execute Plan 4. Make Lawrence's ex-wife bankrupt and throw his son into prison. I want them to have the life to get the money, but not the life to spend it." The information Michelle had found before showed that Lawrence had been married before. His son was 6 years old this year and lived with his ex-wife. After saying that, Roan directly put away the phone whose screen was not on the dialing interface. Fouquet. Hearing this, Lawrence's eyes suddenly widened and he cursed loudly. Then Roan picked up a rag and stuffed it into his mouth, grabbed Lawrence's head and slammed it against the wall, stared into his eyes and said fiercely, "Remember, Lawrence, you have the blood of your colleagues in your hands. If I die, your son will not be well either." After saying that, Roan no longer paid attention to Lawrence who was struggling wildly with bloodshot eyes, and turned away from here and walked to Hunter. Hunter looked at Roan, who was looking down at the gun, with a complicated expression on his face. He heard what Roan had just threatened Lawrence. Rationally, Hunter did not agree with Roan's behavior of threatening Lawrence with a child. But emotionally, his cousin who grew up with him died in Lawrence's hands, and he and Deputy Team Leader Greenwood were also facing a group of enemies at this time, and he didn't know what the result would be. Taking a deep breath, Hunter threw aside the many complicated thoughts in his mind, leaving only the first thought, and said to Luo An with a serious face, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, we will attack the enemy at the back door later. I will do my best to contain the enemy. You find a way to escape from here." Luo An, who had checked his equipment and was quietly checking the situation of the enemy outside the apartment, was slightly stunned when he heard this. Looking back and seeing the resolute look on Hunter Anderson's face, Luo An understood the subtext of the other party's words, laughed, and patted the other party on the shoulder. "Relax, we won't die today. Don't forget, we agreed to go out for a drink together before." Hunter didn't know where Luo An got his confidence from. There were 16 people on the other side, and they only had 2 people, so when he heard Luo An's words, Hunter's face became even more anxious. Luo An did not explain, but magically took out 3 stun grenades from his waist and stuffed them into Hunter's hands, who was full of astonishment. "Be careful later, throw one if it doesn't work." "Okay." Just as Hunter nodded with a complicated expression, the enemies outside the apartment had already walked to the door of the apartment. The enemies at the front and back doors broke into the apartment at the same time with rifles, and left a few outside the apartment waiting for the retreat. "Check every room. Quick, quick. Go upstairs, upstairs." The black-clad enemies wearing black masks acted quickly, holding rifles and began to search every room in the apartment quickly. One of the black-clad enemies stepped up the stairs of the apartment, and Luo An did not hesitate to take out a stun grenade and throw it downstairs. The pupils of the leading black-clad enemy shrank. "Be careful." Stun grenade. Boom. The next second, a deafening explosion and strong light suddenly broke out in this small apartment, and the glass on the first floor of the apartment was instantly shattered. Luo An saw this, and immediately said coldly, "Shoot." Bang, bang, bang. As soon as the voice fell, Hunter, who had reacted, immediately raised his pistol and pulled the trigger downstairs. The black-clad enemy who was hit in the face by the stun grenade was shot and fell to the ground instantly, but the enemies behind him immediately raised their weapons and fired at the upstairs. Bang, bang, bang. Gunshots suddenly rang out in the apartment, and the bullets in Hunter's pistol were quickly emptied. Seeing this, Luo An handed him the pistol he had snatched from Lawrence before, and then threw another stun grenade at the stairs. Boom. Bang, bang. The stun grenade exploded again, and Hunter, who was also very agile and sharp, shot and killed another enemy. At this time, Luo An temporarily left the battlefield and returned to the room where Lawrence was. Running quickly to Lawrence, Roan pulled the rag out of his mouth and asked in a serious tone, "I'll give you one last chance. Will you tell me or not?" "I'll tell you." Lawrence looked at Roan with anger, but he only had one son, so although Lawrence wanted to bite Roan to death, he quickly told him everything he knew at this level. Hunter outside had used up the bullets in his pistol again and shouted, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, they're coming up. Come to me quickly." Lawrence had finished his narration at this time, and Roan stuffed the rag back into his mouth again and pressed the communicator while walking out. "Mona, call someone. Start the action." Chapter 319. The enemy's explosive mentality and the FBI's arrival. In a small apartment, gunshots rang out. Several black-clad enemies at the stairwell cursed. Although their faces could not be seen clearly due to masks, it was clear that their faces were definitely very ugly. They knew that Deputy Team Leader Greenwood in the apartment had the habit of using stun grenades, but they never expected that there would be so many stun grenades. At this time, 4 black-clad enemies had fallen at the stairwell on the first floor. Except for the one that Roan killed at the beginning, the remaining 3 were killed by Hunter. Hunter's tactics were also very simple. When he saw the enemy coming up, he threw a stun grenade and then shot him in the head while the opponent could not see clearly. If the opponent's teammates suppressed him with firepower, Hunter would throw a stun grenade at the moment when the opponent walked up to the second floor and then shoot him in the head. The routine was simple, but very useful. If the pistol bullets had not been used up, and Roan had used up all the stun grenades he gave himself, Hunter felt that he might be able to kill all these enemies. Luo An didn't know what Hunter was thinking. If he knew, he would definitely beat him up. The other side had rifles and more people. They just took advantage of the spatial layout. If the other side wanted to kill them, Hunter, who had lost his advantage, would most likely be sent to heaven. Come to my place. Hearing Luo An's words, Hunter immediately left the room and retreated to Luo An's position. Then he heard Luo An press the communicator and shout, "Start the action." Although the pistol was out of bullets, Hunter's eyes suddenly became extremely bright when he heard Roan's words. "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, do we have support?" "Indeed." Roan nodded, which made Hunter's mouth corners rise instantly, and then Roan continued to add, "But it will take some time." Hunter's smile paused slightly. "How long will it take?" "I don't know." Seeing Hunter's frozen smile, Roan grinned. "Just kidding. Support will be here soon." Patting Hunter on the shoulder, Roan opened the safety of the Glock 18, glanced at the black-clad enemy who was about to go up to the second floor, and said without looking back, "Be sure to keep an eye on Lawrence. He will be very useful in this case." "No problem, but..." Hunter raised the pistol without bullets in his hand, wanting to ask Roan what he was going to do. But before he could say anything, Hunter saw Roan rush out of the room like a ghost. Hunter's eyes widened when he saw this scene. Just as he was about to go out to check, there was a burst of fierce gunfire outside the apartment. Thinking of the 4 black-clad enemies outside who were responsible for blocking their retreat, Hunter quickly stepped over Lawrence on the ground, moved to the window and quietly checked, and then saw a group of FBI agents holding guns and attacking the black-clad enemies. The black-clad enemies outside the apartment also heard the gunfire. An enemy standing behind saw the FBI outside, and his pupils suddenly trembled. He turned his head and asked hurriedly, "Someone is coming outside. What should we do?" "Son of..." Seeing the identity of the FBI outside, the black-clad enemy who led the group of FBI suddenly changed his face, and he gritted his teeth, and waved his hand and said immediately, "Kill upstairs. Take people hostage." Okay. There were a total of 4 people outside the apartment who were responsible for blocking the retreat of the front and back doors. Luo An and Hunter had just killed 4 people at the stairs. There were only 8 black-clad people left in the apartment. Hearing what the captain said, the other 7 black-clad enemies immediately raised their rifles and prepared to rush to the second floor of the apartment. For them who are very familiar with the FBI's operational procedures, the only way out is to take hostages. But the next second, 3 objects suddenly rolled in front of everyone. Seeing the appearance of the objects, everyone immediately cursed. "Fuke." Boom boom boom, the stun grenade exploded again, and the white light, that was more dazzling than before, flashed their eyes again. The moment he left the room, Luo An opened the system page, took out a bottle of swift potion, and poured it into his stomach, where no one could see, and then threw a stun grenade at the stairs, and flashed over with the Glock 18. Before leaving the special investigation team, Luo An had already expected that there would be an enemy who would kill him. The reason was that the first move of the mastermind, to frame him with an overseas account, had been blocked by Luo An. The longer the time dragged, the more disadvantageous it would be for the mastermind, so the other party would definitely send someone to kill Luo An tonight. To this end, Roan not only made a corresponding plan, but also took out a full 10 stun grenades from the equipment warehouse. He had used 1 before, and gave 3 to Hunter, leaving Roan with 6 left. The next second, after throwing 3 stun grenades at once, Roan stepped on the wall of the stairs, and jumped downstairs very quickly, and then pulled the trigger at the heads of the 3 black-clad enemies closest to him. Bang, 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 3 gunshots. 3 watermelons cracked in response, and the juice spilled all over the ground. "He's on the left. Shoot." The moment the teammate fell, the remaining black-clad enemies who had not yet recovered from the white light immediately fired wildly in the direction of the gunshot. Bang, bang, bang. As the gunshots rang out, a large number of thumb-sized craters suddenly appeared on the wall, but there was no figure of Roan as imagined. "Cease fire." Seeing this, the black-clad enemy leader quickly ordered everyone to stop shooting. After all, they didn't have many bullets left, and they must not waste them. After a quick look at the situation near the staircase, the leading black-clad enemy immediately pointed to the kitchen next to him. Before he could finish his words, 2 more objects flew out from the living room. Boom, boom, *%. The moment the 2 stun grenades exploded, the remaining 5 black-clad enemies were furious, and they all subconsciously pulled the trigger towards the location where the stun grenades flew out. After so many years, and so many years of work, this was the first time they encountered such a thing, and their mentality was about to explode. One of the black-clad agents with grey eyes cursed, "If you have the ability, don't use stun grenades. You coward." Luo An ignored the other party, just raised the Glock 18, and pulled the trigger at the head of this guy and the enemy next to him with an expressionless face. Bang, bang, 2 gunshots, 2 more watermelons shattered, and the team of black-clad enemies reduced by 2 more people. Caca. At this moment, the magazine of the leading black-clad man's rifle was empty. He was about to reload. Luo An noticed this, and stepped hard on the ground. He moved behind him like lightning, and asked with a smile, "Do you need me to lend you some bullets?" The sudden sound in his ear made the black-clad enemy's hair stand up instantly, and his head broke into cold sweat. He subconsciously grabbed the dagger at his waist, and prepared to attack the other party, but suddenly felt a heavy blow from his lower back. Bang! Luo An raised his fist, and punched the black-clad enemy's lower back fiercely. The terrifying force made the black-clad enemy's eyeball bulge, and an indescribable pain instantly spread throughout his body. The black-clad enemy who was hit hard by the heavy punch fell forward uncontrollably, but was caught by Luo An, and blocked in front of him. Because the remaining 2 black-clad enemies had found Luo An, raised their rifles, and aimed at him, shouting, "Put him down." Luo An, who was hiding behind the black-clad enemy, was not panicked at all, and asked back, "Are you sure?" Bang, bang. Before the remaining 2 black-clad enemies could finish their words, 2 gunshots rang out from behind them. A bleeding hole appeared behind the watermelon, and the 2 fell to the ground with their pupils dilated. The shooters were the FBI agents who had rushed over. Seeing these FBI agents, Luo An knocked out the surviving black-clad enemy leader and grinned, "You guys are here very quickly." The 2 FBI agents who fired the gun made way, and the officer behind them came over, looking at Luo An expressionlessly and said, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood was attacked. How could we not rush over?" Chapter 320 Luo An's Countermeasures and Conspiracy. Captain Lawrence's apartment, 1st floor. Roan bent down, found the phone in the pocket of the leading black-clad enemy, sent a random message to Mona, then stood up, and looked at the familiar face in front of him, and smiled. "What do you think now? Do you still think I'm the murderer of Pearson, Captain Horst?" The FBI outside the apartment were the agents of the inspection department who had searched Roan's house before, and their leader was naturally their chief Horst. The inspection department searched the apartment with a search warrant. Roan used emotional perception to find that Ulrich was the problematic person, so he thought of using the group of people from the inspection department Horst. The reason is simple. Roan can't determine which of the senior officials of the FBI Los Angeles branch and other agents outside their special investigation team have problems, and which ones don't. Instead of looking for some support that needs to be guarded against, whether they will backstab him later, it is better to go directly to the group of people from the inspection department Horst. The first is that Luo An has confirmed that most of them just generally hate him, without the kind of cold malice. The only one who has other ideas about him was locked up in the interrogation room of the special investigation team by Luo An. Therefore, the previous enemies have become the best protection in the current situation. For the sake of their own cases and face, the supervision department will not let Luo An, a suspect, die in the hands of others. The second is related to the mastermind. Since the mastermind only wants to use the supervision department and treat them as tools, it means that the mastermind's ability is not enough to have all the power in the supervision department. Otherwise, even if Luo An took away the overseas accounts, the mastermind would be able to fabricate some other charges for Luo An. Luo An, who figured this out, immediately decided to play along. The mastermind used the supervision department as a tool to calculate himself, so of course he could also use the supervision department as a tool to calculate the mastermind in turn. Luo An left Mona and Michelle in the special investigation team because he needed them to contact Horst and others as quickly as possible when Luo An needed them. When leaving the FBI Los Angeles building, Roan pressed the communicator to contact Mona and asked her to contact the supervision department. When he was chatting with Lawrence in the apartment, the supervision department was on the way. A group of enemies in black attacked the apartment. When Roan successfully asked Lawrence what he knew, Mona said that the supervision department would be here soon. During this period, Mona, according to Roan's arrangement, used computer technology to transfer the negotiation between Roan and Lawrence to the supervision department. Lawrence later said all the clues, and the supervision department heard them clearly. In this case, Horst and his group of people in the supervision department naturally knew the truth about Roan's false accusation, and also knew about the criminal behavior of a senior official who took advantage of his position to steal money from the foundation. Roan thought very clearly that confronting the FBI senior officials, even if there was evidence in hand, the subsequent evidence and trial would be a very time-consuming task. The people in the special investigation team could be counted on one hand, and they must not spend all the time on this case. Moreover, Luo An could not guarantee whether the allies of the FBI senior management would take action against the other members of the special investigation team after today. In this case, it would be the best choice to throw the follow-up work of this case to the supervision department. Their supervision department is responsible for the cases of crimes committed by the management personnel within the FBI, and they have a large number of people and rich experience in handling such cases, and have the time and ability to fight with those FBI senior management. Of course, the benefits of the special investigation team cannot be missed. After all, the key clues were found by Luo An and his team, and the special investigation team should at least share half of the gains afterwards. Luo An's plan was an open conspiracy, and Horst from the supervision department quickly figured it out when he received Mona's call for support. But Horst had no way to refuse, because they had the handle of the traitor Ulrich in their internal affairs, and Luo An still held it. Moreover, Mona followed Roan's previous instructions and said that the interrogation records of Ulrich had been sorted out and were in the mailbox of the special investigation team's computer, ready to be sent to Washington at any time. Waving his hand, signaling the agents behind him to deal with the bodies at the scene and go upstairs to arrest Lawrence, Horst gritted his teeth and stared at Roan. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, what a good trick. No, it was just luck. I should thank you for saving my life. Roan laughed and stretched out his right hand to Horst. Horst looked at Roan for a few times, but still stretched out his right hand and shook his hand. As for Roan's words of thanks, Horst didn't believe them at all. There were a total of 16 enemies, and Roan killed half of them by himself, and he was at ease throughout the whole process. Horst felt that, even if their supervision department didn't come, Roan might be able to kill all the remaining enemies. Not only Horst thought so, but the agents of the supervision department behind him also gasped when they saw the bodies on the first floor of the apartment and stared at Roan in amazement. They had heard about the bank robbery before and knew that Roan was good at fighting, but they never expected that Roan was so good at fighting. Looking at Roan in front of them, not only was he intelligent, he also knew how to use political means, and he was so agile. No wonder he became the deputy head of the special investigation team at such a young age. In addition, he had a big supporter behind him, so as long as nothing unexpected happened in the future, there would definitely be a place for Roan in Washington. After thinking through these things, Horst, who still wanted to continue to climb up, had a gleam in his eyes and silently decided in his heart that he must build a good relationship with Roan in the future. However, the attitude changed too quickly, which easily aroused Luo An's vigilance, so after the two shook hands, Horst still had a cold face and said indifferently, since Deputy Team Leader Greenwood is safe, the rest of the matters can be left to our supervision department, and we will handle it. Luo An grinned when he heard this. Hey, this is a bit too much. I think it's Deputy Team Leader Greenwood who is excessive. Taking a step back to avoid the hand that was hugging his shoulder, Horst glanced at Luo An. Does Deputy Team Leader Greenwood intend to handle the follow-up of this case himself? Horst had already guessed Luo An's conspiracy, so his attitude was very clear. Their supervision department did make some small mistakes in this case, and they can do some dirty, tiring, and time-consuming work later, but the benefits must not be reduced. Roan pretended not to see Horst's unhappy look, and replied with a smile, "This is a big case. It's enough for our two teams to work together. Of course, we need to solve the subsequent work together. However, do you think this case is over here?" "Of course not." Horst glanced at Roan. Lawrence just said what he knew, and he didn't know about the high-level things, so there must be a follow-up to this case. However, Horst said that he was not in a hurry. Their supervision department had rich experience in such cases, and was sure to dig deep into this case. Roan spread his hands, and smiled as usual, "But if you do this, it will take you a long time, right? This is certain. The work responsibilities of the supervision department determine that their investigation must be limited, and the speed cannot be too fast." So Horst looked at Roan and asked, "What do you want?" Roan didn't waste any words and whispered directly, "The harvest after the event is 30% and 70%. I want 7. Impossible." Chapter 321 Bargaining, and the real situation behind the case. Hearing Luo An's words, Horst shook his head, and refused without thinking. So their supervision department was responsible for the most complicated, time-consuming and offensive work, but they could only get 30% of the proceeds from this case. Horst stretched out his hand, and stared at Luo An. 30% to 70% is fine. I want 70%. No. Luo An also shook his head and refused. "Don't forget, Yurik from your supervision department is still in my interrogation room. The appearance of a mole in the subordinates can be a big deal or a small deal for people at the management level, depending on whether there are other people who are doing something in this regard." So Horst immediately stared at Luo An with wide eyes, and Luo An stared back without giving in. The two of them were in a stalemate for a moment, and Horst pursed his lips. 40% to 60%. I want 60%. I want 60%. Luo An's eyes flashed with a gleam of light, and he whispered, "If this case is delayed for too long, those people will have the opportunity to leave the Federation." Team Leader Horst, you don't want to see your agents working so hard to identify the suspect, but in the end, because of your momentary thought, he escaped early, right? Horst's face twitched when he heard it. Why did he always feel that something was wrong with what Luo An said? Taking a deep breath, Horst whispered, "Do you have any clues?" "Of course." Luo An nodded, took out his mobile phone, and looked at it. "The other party is now ready to leave the Federation. 50-50. After pondering for a while, Horst gritted his teeth, and said his final distribution plan. He could do without it, but the share of his agents must not be less. Roan looked at Horst in silence for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "Okay, 50-50 then." Horst finally breathed a sigh of relief, and just as he was about to speak, Roan suddenly pulled him back and whispered, "The last question, who is 5? After making a little joke with Horst, Roan briefly chatted with him, handed the scene over to the group of agents from the supervision department, and then walked towards the car not far away in the admiring eyes of the agents. "Wait a minute." At this moment, Hunter Anderson suddenly ran over and said to Roan with a serious face, "Thank you, Deputy Team Leader Greenwood." "Yeah." Roan knew what he was talking about and responded casually and was about to drive away when he heard Hunter continue, "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, I would like to apply to join your special investigation team." "Yeah?" Roan, who was sitting in the driver's seat of the SUV, was slightly stunned and turned his head to look at Hunter. To be able to join the SWAT action team, Hunter's physical fitness, shooting skills, and fighting skills must be good. Moreover, Hunter had been working in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Bureau before, and chose to join SWAT in order to avenge his cousin. This shows that Hunter has a high level of knowledge, values feelings, is tenacious, and can control his emotions at critical moments. From these aspects alone, Hunter is qualified to join the Special Investigation Team. However, those who have submitted self-recommendation letters to the Special Investigation Team are all extraordinary and have their own unique skills. Compared with those people, Hunter really has no outstanding features. After thinking for a while, Luo An said, the special investigation team may hold a test in a few days. If you are interested, you can sign up. After speaking, Luo An did not wait for the other party to answer and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the sub rushed forward directly. Looking at the back of the car leaving in a cloud of dust and seeing Lawrence stuffed into the car, Hunter Anderson pursed his lips, silently made up his mind, and finally turned and left. On the other side, Roan drove his sub through an intersection, holding his phone, and asked with a smile, "How is it, Mona? Have you found any clues?" Of course. Mona in the office area of the special investigation team patted Michelle's arm and replied with a smile. Michelle's credit, she found some clues about the other party in the database of the FBI Washington headquarters. Well done. Roan chatted briefly for a few words and then called Lassie. Your temporary vacation is over. Lassie, come out and act with me. After getting Lassie's response, Roan hung up the phone and drove towards the target location, while silently reviewing all the clues he got in this case. The clues Lawrence mentioned before mentioned a senior SWAT team member and a senior member of the Criminal Justice Department. It was these two people who issued the order to kill team leader Rowan and Pearson. These two people alone could not steal $9 million from the Foundation, so Horst just took off the masks on the faces of the black-clad enemies and asked the supervision department to check their identities, and then found that these people were all agents from the Department of Homeland Security. Earlier, Luo An picked up the phone of the black-clad enemy leader and sent a message to Mona. Mona successfully found the last person contacted by this phone and found that the other party was a senior official of the Department of Homeland Security. The senior official's financial accounts were clear on the surface, but privately, he had many overseas accounts. The dates of deposits into several of these accounts were almost the same as the funds lost by the Foundation. Not long after, Lassie, who had been hiding for a long time, got on the SUV and brought Luo An a thick hamburger. After listening to Roan's narration, Lassie nodded and muttered while eating. So, the real mastermind behind the scenes is this senior official from the Department of Homeland Security. He is the one who stole the money from the Foundation, right? No. Roan continued to drive the SUV forward at a high speed and shook his head. In fact, this senior official from the Department of Homeland Security is only responsible for covering up the news. Lassie was puzzled. What do you mean? Literally. Roan handed his mobile phone to Lassie and explained, why did team leader Rowan write in the previous clue that someone stole $9 million from the Foundation? Because the operation of the mastermind behind the scenes was really stealing. According to the regulations of the FBI agent and SWAT team member Injury and Disability Retirement Security Fund, injured team members on the front line have the right to request help from this fund. In order to reasonably and unnoticeably take money from the fund, the senior SWAT official would report the number of injured personnel to the Foundation, fabricate many injured team members who exceeded the actual situation, and take out excess funds from it. In order to prevent anyone from finding out about this, the senior officials of the Criminal Justice Department use their methods to monitor the situation at all times, and sent people to silence them if they found anything wrong. According to the principle of separation of powers, the internal structure of this foundation is also the same. Part of the power of the senior official of the Department of Homeland Security happens to be in charge of the accountant of the foundation. The accountants in the foundation know exactly how much money the foundation has and how the money is spent, but they happen to be under the jurisdiction of the senior official of the Department of Homeland Security, so the news of the problem with the funds is locked up by the other party. But, hearing this, Lassie raised her own question. But, according to the rules of that foundation, if you want to take money out of the fund, it needs to be reviewed by another party. It's impossible for them to do this. As she was talking, Lassie saw Luo An's slightly raised mouth corners finally react, and she suddenly widened her eyes and exclaimed, "You mean, the real mastermind behind this matter is actually the person who is responsible for reviewing whether to issue funds?" "That's right." Luo An grinned and said, "In the Federal Society, there is a person whose car is not damaged, but he wants to tell the insurance company that his car is damaged and wants to apply for compensation. Then he must pay part of the money he applied for to the insurance company employee who came to review. Conversely, if the employee of this insurance company wants to make money, what will he do? Son of eating. Lassie instantly understood the subtext of Luo An's words and cursed in a low voice. After a few seconds of silence, she pointed at the 3 suspects in charge of reviewing this aspect on Luo An's mobile phone, gritted her teeth and asked, "Who is it specifically?" Luo An did not answer, but glanced at the rearview mirror. "No hurry, shake off the tail first." Chapter 322 Private Airport. Luo An, "No way, no way." The black SUV was moving forward quickly. Lassie heard what Luo An said and hurriedly looked back. "Don't panic." Seeing Lassie's nervous expression, Luo An explained, "Half of them are our own people." Lassie looked puzzled. Luo An pointed to a Buick sedan not far behind them and laughed. "People from the supervision department." Just now, Luo An and Horst had a friendly exchange on the issue of the distribution of the harvest after this case, and finally decided to split it 50-50. However, one of the reasons why Horst agreed to this distribution agreement was that Luo An still had a clue about the bottom level mastermind. If the other party could be arrested before Luo An, Horst could refuse this 50-50 split and negotiate with Luo An again. So as soon as Luo An left the scene, Horst sent someone to drive up. Luo An, who had long noticed the follower, had no dissatisfaction with Horst's behavior. Simply thinking from his perspective, Luo An would do the same. It's just a face, how can it be more important than the actual benefits? Okay. Knowing the other party's identity, Lassie sat back in the passenger seat and breathed a sigh of relief and asked, "Are you going to do this? The target location is a bit far from here, and it's unrealistic not to drive. This area is also a bit congested, and it may not be easy to get rid of the other party." "It's okay, I'm prepared." Luo An threw Lassie a reassuring look, then turned the steering wheel and drove the SUV to another road. Seeing this, the Buick behind hurriedly followed. But just after turning the intersection, the 2 agents in the Buick sedan saw the SUV parked on the side of the road. After getting out of the car and searching carefully for a while, the 2 inspectors looked at each other with an unpleasant expression, took out their mobile phones and called Horst. "Sorry, sir, we failed." On the other side, Lassie, who changed into a set of clothes according to Luo An's request, looked at the number 2 SUV of the special investigation team in front of her and said with surprise, "Luo An, when did you prepare this car?" "It was thrown here in front." This SUV was the car that Luo An deliberately threw near the big shopping mall when he left home with the steak. Just now, after getting off SUV number 1 with Lassie, Roan took her through several streets quickly, entered the mall through a side door, and finally walked to SUV number 2 in the parking lot. As for whether the 2 agents from the inspection department who were following him would find out, Roan was not worried. After the 2 agents who followed the SUV in the parking lot failed, Horst would most likely not give them the tracking task again. The second agent who was responsible for tracking was most likely unaware of the SUV in front. By the time Horst told them about it, Roan had already driven away from the mall. Cool. Sitting in the co-pilot seat, Lassie smiled at Roan after listening to his narration. When the car continued to move forward, she asked again, "Roan, you haven't answered my previous question. Which of the 3 senior officials who are responsible for reviewing the Foundation's outward grants is the real mastermind behind the scenes?" "Of course, it's the one who has the closest connection with money and is more short of money." Roan handed the phone to Lassie, which contained a senior official found by Mona who had many contacts with senior SWAT officials, senior Homeland Security officials, and senior criminal justice officials. At a private airport in northern Los Angeles, a thin gray-haired white man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s sat in the waiting area, looking out the window expressionlessly. On the surface, he seemed to be unhurried, but the 2 fingers he kept rubbing showed that he was not in a peaceful mood. Next to the gray-haired white man stood 4 muscular men in suits. Looking at his watch, the white-haired man turned around and asked in a hoarse voice, "How long will it take for the pilots to arrive?" The man in a suit standing next to the white-haired man was about to answer when a man's laughter suddenly came from the gate not far from the waiting area. "It would have taken another minute, but 3 minutes ago, my agents called the pilots and asked them to go home and rest." Seeing a man and a woman walking towards him not far away, the white-haired man stood up with his eyes narrowed. "Deputy head of the Special Investigation Team, Roan Greenwood." I didn't expect my name to be so widely spread. I'm really surprised. The visitors were Roan and Lassie. Walking in front of the four sturdy men in suits, Roan laughed. "Good evening, Deputy Director of the Information Management Department of the FBI Los Angeles branch, Chief Alexander Harris. The Deputy Director of the Information Management Department is one of the main persons in charge of supervising the review of the Foundation's funding. Under his exclusion and interest exchange, the other two senior officials in charge of the review work have only the name of supervision, but not the reality of supervision." Patting the sturdy men in suits and asking them to step aside, Alexander walked up to Luo An, his eyes slightly curved and revealing a smile. "I wonder what Deputy Team Leader Greenwood wants to talk to me about today. It's a small matter, very simple." Luo An casually said his catchphrase and smiled. "It's just that you took advantage of your position to steal money from the FBI agents and SWAT team members' disability retirement security fund. The incident happened, so I asked you to return to headquarters to cooperate with the investigation." Alexander's expression remained unchanged. "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, you will be held legally responsible for spreading rumors and slandering others. We already have evidence. Evidence can also be forged. You can confront the group of people in the supervision department about this later." Luo An decisively chose to pass the buck, too lazy to continue talking nonsense with the other party. He crossed his hands, his fists creaking, and asked with a smile, "I wonder which process Chief Alexander plans to follow. Do I beat up your four men with my fists first, and then you go with me, or do you skip this step and go directly with me?" Alexander, who was almost 60 years old, twitched his eyelids when he saw this and slowly stepped back. Seeing this, the four men in suits all grinned and showed ferocious expressions and walked up with their hands crossed and clenched fists. There were only two people on Luo An's side, him and Lassie, but there were four people on the other side. Alexander felt that this wave was stable, so he laughed. "I have heard that Deputy Team Leader Greenwood is very skilled. This time." Bang, 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 bang. Before Alexander finished speaking, Luo An took out a pistol from behind at lightning speed, aimed at the thighs of the four sturdy white men, and pulled the trigger. The next second after the four men wailed and fell to the ground, Lassie took out a pair of handcuffs from behind and instantly walked forward to handcuff Alexander's hands. The smile on Alexander's face froze. Everything happened too fast and he didn't react at all. What era is this? Why don't you use a gun but your fist? Luo An selectively ignored the four people on the ground who scolded him for being unethical and sneak attacking and for using his fists to deceive them. Instead, he walked up to Alexander and said with a smile, "You don't really think that I will use my fists to fight with the four of them and then be knocked to the ground by them because of a short move and finally let you escape from here smoothly? No way." When Alexander heard this, his face turned red and white and his hair was about to explode with anger. He waved his hand to Lassie, who was covering her mouth and laughing, indicating that she should take Alexander away quickly, and then Luo An took out his mobile phone and called Mona. "How is the supervision department?" Chapter 323. The case ends. Spitting at each other. The supervision department has finished dealing with the case at Lawrence's house. In the office area of the special investigation team, Mona was sitting in front of the computer and yawned. Two agents from the supervision department just came and wanted to take Yurik away from the interrogation room, but were stopped by Michelle with a gun. "Well done." Luo An nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "Tell Michelle later that after this case is handled, our special investigation team will have 3 days off and she can go red freely. You also gave us a day off last time." Mona turned around in her chair and said speechlessly, "As a result, the case of team leader Rowan happened, and we didn't get to spend that day off." Luo An opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. The last time he had a day off, the case of team leader Rowan happened. So this time he would have a 3-day holiday. Shaking his head vigorously and quickly throwing the thoughts that emerged in his mind aside, Luo An chatted briefly with Mona and hung up the phone immediately. He continued to call the ambulance and asked them to come here to deal with the wounded who were accidentally shot. When the ambulance arrived here and took away the 4 muscular men who kept thanking him, Roan took the car back to the special investigation team. It was already midnight. Because they had Yurik and Alexander in their hands, Roan, Mona, Lassie, and Michelle temporarily stayed in the office area of the Special Investigation Team for a night and met with Horst and others from the Supervision Department the next day. Looking at the not so strange face of Alexander Harris and the photocopies of some key clues that Mona gave him, Horst looked at Roan with a solemn expression. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, you always bring me some surprises. Roan smiled slightly. It's okay, you're welcome. Hearing this, Horst had a better understanding of Roan's thickness of face, and then turned around and left the Special Investigation Team with his agents. Horst didn't say much, but deep down, he was still very happy that Roan had successfully captured Alexander. If Alexander really succeeded in leaving the Federation last night, then even if their inspection department investigated the case later, they would not have such a satisfactory harvest because they did not catch the real mastermind in time. From this perspective, Wist should thank Roan. But Horst would not say thank you to Roan, because when he thought about the harvest after the case was handled, he would have to split it 50-50 with Roan and the others. Horst felt his heart bleeding. How rude. Seeing Horst leave here without saying anything, Roan curled his lips and turned to look at Michelle. Michelle, Lassie, you go to the inspection department and watch them handle this case. If they need help in handling the case, please contact us in time. If you find them doing something tricky, remember to contact us in time. After all, Michelle came from the inspection department of the FBI Washington headquarters. She is familiar with the work process of the inspection department and can find out whether the inspection department is doing tricky things in time. Lassie came from the intelligence department. Although she doesn't know much about the work process of the inspection department, she understands women. Roan believes that Lassie can definitely rely on this ability to get the information she wants through the female agents in the inspection department. Okay, no problem. Michelle nodded with a smile. Lassie grinned, and they turned around and left the Special Investigation Team together. Luo An sat back in his chair, stretched his body hard, and said with emotion, this case is finally handled. I'm so tired. Done. Are you sure? Mona next to him finished her breakfast in a few bites, took a sip of coffee to wash the food down, and asked, most of the information and clues we have about the senior SWAT officer, the senior official of the Department of Criminal Justice, the senior official of the Department of Homeland Security, the senior official of the Department of Information Management and others are just indirect clues. There is not much direct evidence. Can we really bring them down successfully? That depends on your definition of the word we. Luo An reached out and grabbed another bag of breakfast on Mona's table and said while eating, if it were just our special investigation team, a few of us would definitely not be able to bring these people down. But with the existence of the supervision department, the possibility of success is increased to 80%. In the early days of the FBI, the supervision department has always been an unpopular department. The reason is very simple. Who asked them to investigate their colleagues on weekdays? Until the death of the first FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, who did not want to be named, the President of the United States and other senior officials began to rapidly develop the power and work content of the FBI's inspection department in order to weaken the influence of the FBI until it had the corresponding power now. If our special investigation team is on top of those senior officials, then we cannot rule out the possibility that the four of us will be assassinated by the Black Hand after get off work. In Mona's angry eyes, Luo An quickly finished his breakfast and explained with a smile, if it is mainly the inspection department and it is on top of those senior officials, then most of the attention of those senior officials will be attracted by the inspection department, and the possibility of our four special investigation team being assassinated will be greatly reduced. If during this period, an agent of the inspection department is assassinated because of this case, then the things that follow will be more interesting. After the death of J. Edgar Hoover, the President of the United States gave the inspection department a lot of considerable powers in order to support the FBI inspection department. Although many of those powers have been taken back as time goes by, some of them are still there. Once an agent of the inspection department is killed, the mastermind behind the murder is 100%, and some FBI officials and agents will face a crazy counterattack. Okay, I understand what you mean. After understanding the idea of you handle the difficult things, and I will share half of the benefits in Luo An's words, Mona stopped worrying about this matter and turned around to start calling a pizza shop not far from the FBI Los Angeles branch and asking them to deliver food here. The general framework of Team Leader Rowan's case has been completed, but there are still many details to be handled. Luo An is not very good at these things, so Mona, Lassie and Michelle can only handle it. In the next week, the special and the inspection department were handling this big case. During this period, there were many lawyers and others of those senior officials who accused them of insufficient evidence, but they were all blocked by the experienced inspection department, and more direct clues were taken out. One day a week later, Luo An, who was standing outside the door holding a cup of tea and watching the show, was very impressed as he watched the inspectors of the supervision department spitting at the lawyers of senior officials with the evidence they had just found. He said, "Sure enough, the supervision department is still experienced in dealing with this group of people." Horst, who had been busy these days and could not sleep for a few hours a day, saw Luo An's appearance and his forehead was full of black lines. "Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, don't disturb my subordinates at work, okay? No problem." Luo An respected Horst and others who were responsible for the hardest part of the work at this time. He smiled and distributed the food he brought to the detectives. Luo An briefly discussed with them for a few words and finally set his sights on Horst. Luo An whispered to Horst how long it would take for this case to be over and how long it would take for the reward to arrive. Hearing this question, Horst glanced at Roan, then raised the folder in his hand. "This case will take several months to complete, and you'll get the reward and so on." Roan's eyes widened when he heard this, and just as he was about to speak, Michelle suddenly came up to him. "Roan, Team Supervisor Potenburn wants to see you." Chapter 324 Special Case Handling Funds. FBI Los Angeles Branch. Team Leader's Office. "Good morning, sir. Have a seat." Roan sat down on the chair, looked at Potenburn, and asked with a smile, "Sir, did you ask me to come here for a mission?" "No mission. I just want to talk to you about something." Potenburn leaned back tactically, crossed his legs, and said with his hands crossed, "Your special investigation team did a great job on this case. Team Leader Owen. The director praised you a lot. We have to thank you for your help, sir." Roan laughed, and Potenburn also smiled with his words. After a few simple words, Potenburn finally mentioned the business and handed a folder on the table to Roan. Luo An took the folder, opened it to check the contents. Potenburn slowly explained, "Luo An, the director is very satisfied with the fact that your special investigation team did not cause too many casualties or too much impact during the case handling process." The contents of the folder were the notice of bonuses issued to the 4 people in their special investigation team, and Luo An's bonus continued to double. In addition, there was a second piece of paper. Luo An opened it and saw that their special investigation team had obtained a special case handling fund of $400,000. Luo An's eyes moved slightly, closed the folder, and smiled. "Thank you, Director. Thank you, sir. These are what we should do." The content of the document did not specify the specific use of this special fund. With Potenburn's words, Luo An understood the true meaning of this money after a little thought. Hush money. From the beginning, in order to protect himself and Mona and the other 2, Luo An never made a big fuss about this case. Apart from the special investigation and the supervision department, not many other people knew about it. Only some of the top officials of the FBI Los Angeles division knew about it. Most of the lower level agents only knew that team leader Irving had been murdered and didn't know the details behind it. Other law enforcement agencies outside the FBI, such as the LAPD, NSA Los Angeles Division, and various media in Los Angeles that believe everything they hear, didn't know the specific details of the case. The murder of team leader Irving was essentially a scandal within the FBI, and the top officials of the FBI Los Angeles Division certainly didn't want it to be known to everyone. The Special Investigations Unit's approach deeply satisfied them, and the top officials must praise the Special Investigations Unit, but direct praise always requires a legitimate reason. So there was this $400,000 fund that was ostensibly special case handling funds, but was actually a hush money plus reward. You're welcome, you deserve it. Seeing Roan's eyes and smile, Potent Burn knew that Roan had already known the true meaning of the money, nodded with satisfaction and smiled slightly, picked up the coffee, and began to shift the conversation to other things. The two continued to chat for a while, and Roan turned and left. After looking at the time, he didn't rush back to the special investigation team, but took out his cell phone and called Veritas. Since arriving in Los Angeles, Roan has called Veritas almost every 3 to 4 days to keep in touch. After handling the bank robbery and the murder of teenagers, Roan did not forget to briefly describe the general situation of the case to Veritas, and by the way, he cared about Veritas. Although Roan and Veritas are now located at the east and west ends of the federal territory, they are not unfamiliar, but more intimate. During this period, Roan also asked about the current situation of the number 5 investigation team. After Roan took Lassie and Mona away, August, who had no one to use, had to continue to go to the training department to select people, and Riyad took the knowledge he learned from Roan and barely solved a few cases with the newcomers. Although the case took a little longer to handle, and Riyad suffered a few minor injuries, at least the case was solved, and the suspect was caught. The case solving rate of the number 5 investigation team did not drop sharply after leaving Roan. So Augustus has already started to study and promote Riyad to the deputy leader of the 5th investigation team. Upon learning about this, Luo An called Riyad immediately. While asking about his health, he also expressed his congratulations to him and made an appointment to treat him and Ivan in Los Angeles in the future. However, Riyad still planned to take Ivan out to play alone, and he was still going to leave his son at home. Son. At 5:30 p.m. that day, the office area of the special investigation team, Michelle and Lassie returned here after a busy day and sat back in their chairs. Lassie stretched her waist hard. Finally, we have finished the work content of the connection with the supervision department. The subsequent court hearings, case reports, evidence sorting and other work are mostly handled by the supervision department, and the special investigation team is only responsible for a small part, which is a very easy task. Thank you for your hard work. Mona poured them a cup of coffee. She was mainly responsible for sorting out clues these days, and her work content was much easier than Lassie and Michelle. Thank you. Michelle took the coffee and said thank you. Lassie hugged Mona's arm and shook her and asked, Mona, does the 3-day holiday that Roan promised us before still count? We are so tired these days. Mona spread her hands. She didn't know. Of course it counts. At this time, Roan pushed open the door of the team leader's office and walked out, shaking the folder in his hand. Today is Tuesday. Starting from tomorrow, from Wednesday to Friday, we will have 3 days off. Saturday and Sunday will also be normal. Ugh. Hearing this, Lassie instantly jumped up on the spot with full energy. Mona smiled and clapped, and Michelle also looked at Roan with curved eyes. Sit down, sit down. Grabbing Lassie's shoulders and pushing her back to the chair, Roan handed the folder in his hand to them respectively. This is the $2,000 bonus for each of you after this case is solved. Michelle heard this and immediately took the folder with bright eyes. Thank you. Lassie and Mona didn't say anything. They had already gathered together to study the new clothes in Los Angeles. One more thing. Roan raised the 4th folder in his hand and successfully attracted the attention of Mona and Lassie. This is the special case handling fund of our special investigation team. Roan briefly explained the source and situation of the funds, and then the 3 of them took $80,000 each, and Roan kept $160,000. After receiving the money, Mona and Lassie's previous work fatigue disappeared instantly. They not only studied the newly launched women's clothing, but also began to study the new cosmetics on the market. Michelle was shocked when she took the money. She had worked at the Washington headquarters for so long, but she had never saved so much money. Recalling the jealous look on the face of a former colleague when he heard that he was going to be transferred to Roan Greenwood, Michelle looked at the money in his hand and realized, no wonder. What's wrong? Seeing Michelle's dull face, Roan patted her shoulder. Are you okay? Nothing. Michelle shook her head and then said in a very sincere tone, Thank you very much, Deputy Team Leader Roan. You're welcome. You have made a lot of efforts in this case. This is what you deserve. Roan smiled and waved his hand. While Lassie and Mona were not paying attention, he took the snacks on their table and returned to the team leader's office. Roan didn't like to stay in the empty team leader's office on weekdays, but he had some things to do here during this period. Chapter 325. Taking stock of the harvest. Mona's nimble fingers. After solving the case of the murder of teenagers, Roan received a total of $2,909,000. After handling the murder of team leader Owen, Roan received a doubled bonus of $4,000 and a special fund of $160,000. With a weekly salary of $1,000, Roan left $200,000 for emergency before buying a car. With these funds added up, Roan has a cash flow of $3,274,000 on the surface. In terms of fixed assets, Roan has a small apartment in New York and a Chevrolet. There are also stocks of Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon, which were purchased for about $5 million and are currently worth nearly $7 million. In addition to these on the surface, there are also overseas accounts that the mastermind used to frame Roan. The money in those accounts adds up to a full $700,000, and Roan and Mona each get half, and each gets $350,000. In addition, there is also the $300 million that Roan got from the flash memory chip during the bank robbery. The reason why Luo An stayed in the team leader's office was to seriously learn how to launder money from overseas accounts, and then plan to deposit the money in tax havens such as the Cayman Islands and Panama according to the original plan. Luo An did not plan to keep all the $300 million in the account, but planned to invest $200 million. The Federation had too many tricks, and the US dollar had been depreciating. If it was not invested to make money, it would be a loss. Especially in the financial crisis of the Federation a few years later, and the economic shocks in other countries, it would be unreasonable not to make a lot of money in other places except the East. When the money is almost made, Luo An will see if he can continue to move up. The politics of the Federation society has been closely linked to money from beginning to end. Only with money can there be power. There is no Underwood family in Washington in this world, and Luo An does not plan to be president. But if there is a chance to establish a Greenwood family, it seems not bad. Shaking his head, he threw the idea that came to his mind aside. He would talk about the future later. The top priority now is to get the $300 million clean. Taking a deep breath, Luo An picked up the internet money laundering case file on the table, as well as the corresponding internet books, and began to study seriously. Soon it was time to get off work, because tomorrow would be a holiday, and Lassie rode her motorcycle straight to a nightclub. Michelle took a taxi to the Los Angeles Public Library, intending to borrow a dozen books before the library closed. She would not leave the rental house during the holidays. Luo An got into Mona's second-hand car and returned to their rental house with her. Looking at the slowly receding scenery, Luo An sat in the co-pilot, pondered for a while, and smiled. "Mona, come with me to buy a car tomorrow." Mona was stunned for a moment, turned her head. "Are you sure?" "Of course." Luo An nodded, and then said, "But I don't plan to buy a too expensive one this time, just buy one around $10,000. Mona chuckled. "Why, are you scared by the Porsche incident?" Luo An grinned, and did not answer. He was not afraid of meeting the enemy, but he really didn't want to experience the bad feeling of having his new car destroyed for the second time. That night, Roan and Mona prepared dinner together. Roan took out a few candles, lit them, turned off the lights, put on some music, and smiled as he raised his glass to Mona. "Cheers. Cheers." Mona raised her head and took a sip of red wine, picked up her knife and fork, and began to taste the food Roan made. "It's delicious. As long as you like it." Roan ate 2 steaks and a few oysters. After dinner, the two did not clean up the table, but danced slowly to the music, hugging each other. As time went by, the air between the two people became hotter and hotter. Mona leaned against Luo An's ear and whispered, "Luo An, I want to tell you a secret." The air blown by Mona when she spoke made Luo An's ears feel a little itchy, but his heart was getting hotter and hotter, so he also leaned against Mona's ear and whispered, "What secret? Don't be angry if I tell you." "That depends on what you say." Mona laughed and bit Luo An's ear lightly. Not tonight. I'm going to asterisk early. Hearing this, Luo An's face froze, and his fiery heart instantly cooled down. But in a flash, Luo An remembered another thing, and hurriedly pulled Mona away, and asked seriously, how many times has this happened? Are you sick? Let's go to the hospital to see. No, it's just that the work pressure these days is a bit high. Mona felt a touch of warmth in her heart, and hugged Luo An again and danced. Just rest for a while. Okay. Luo An chose to believe Mona, but while dancing, he planned to make some food for Mona that Oriental women would eat at this time. Feeling that Luo An was a little absent-minded and his body was not as strong as before, Mona raised her eyebrows slightly, unhappy. Luo An was about to say what he thought. Mona suddenly bit Luo An's ear. Her face flushed and whispered, "Go to my room. I have prepared a little surprise for you." Without waiting for Luo An to ask, Mona pulled him into Mona's bedroom. 2 hours later, Mona, who was tired, finished washing and fell asleep, and Luo An walked into the shower room with a grin. The computer keyboard is not in vain. My fingers are so flexible. Luo An turned on the shower, closed his eyes, and started to shower, and then opened the system page in his mind. After solving the 2 cases of teenager murder case and team leader ruin murder case, the system gave Luo An an excellent evaluation. The 8 treasure chests opened were Swift Potion X2, Strength Potion X1, Antidote Potion X1, Featherfall Potion X2, and Weakness Potion X1. At this time, Luo An's system warehouse page had Hemostatic Potion X5, Antidote Potion X4, Swift Potion X2, Strength Potion X2, Sensitive Potion X2, Antidote Potion X4, Featherfall Potion X2, Stamina Potion X4, Sleep Potion X2, Aqualung Potion X2, and Weakness Potion X2. During the battle at Lawrence's house, Luo An drank a bottle of Swift Potion, so there were only 2 bottles of Swift Potion in the system at this time. In addition, 3 days ago, 2 $100 bills were opened from the treasure chest, which Luo An stuffed into his pocket to buy daily breakfast and dinner ingredients. Luo An has now completely figured out the logic of opening the treasure chest. On weekdays, the treasure chest will evaluate Luo An's performance and then randomly distribute potions. Every half a month, the system treasure chest will randomly open US dollars. The amount is not fixed. It can be from $1 to $100 US. At least I can save a lot of food money every month. Luo An smacked his lips, closed the system page, took a shower, and returned to Mona's bedroom, hugged Mona and fell asleep. In the next 3 days, Mona went shopping with Lassie during the day, and Luo An watched movies and exercised at home. At night, the 2 of them wandered the streets of Los Angeles, randomly selected restaurants to enjoy delicious food, and lived very happily every day. On Saturday night, Luo An and Mona were watching the sunset at the beach and enjoying their own world. At this time, Lassie suddenly called them. "This is Luo An. What's wrong?" Lassie on the other end of the phone sounded a little anxious and weird. "Luo An, I can't contact Michelle." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.